Chapter 219. Both speed and slowness had their advantages and disadvantages. This was neither a dialectic nor a philosophical question, but a very simple truth. The horse gang charged down from the meadow, and because they were too fast, they fell into the rocks in a pathetic state. The big black horse, on the other hand, was too fast. Even with Ning Kei's archery skills, he could only shoot 3 arrows before he reached the edge of the horse gang. He carried the boxwood bow on his shoulder and stretched his hands forward to hold the pedal on the saddle. He raised his arm and swung his elbow. The blade broke through the air and cut off half of a horse gang's shoulder. Then, he straightened his waist and straightened his arm. The sharp tip of the pedal pierced through the eyeball of another horse gang before the machete could reach him. As the 3 horses crossed each other like lightning, the blood from the horse gang's broken shoulder and the fluid from the eyeball spurted out, spraying all over Ning Kei's face and body. The smell of blood mixed with other smells, and it was very strange. It was said that blood was hot and the wind was cold. However, Ning Kei felt that the wind that blew on his face was hot and the blood that splashed on his face was cold, because he was very calm. Even now, he still clearly remembered the battle principle that he had followed for many years. Killing the horse gang was never as good as injuring them. If a horse gang died, then so be it. If he was seriously injured and could not die immediately, then he would be a burden to his fellow horse gang members. Although this kind of thinking was cruel, it was very useful. Looking at the dozens of horse gang charging towards him, Ning Kei took a deep breath and tightened his grip on the big black horse. He held his pedal horizontally and turned into a blade as he charged forward. Behind him, the 200 yen cavalrymen finally caught up. They formed a line and attacked the side of the horse gang that was still in disarray. The winter wind in the wilderness blew again, but could not blow the hair on Ning Kei's forehead. This was because his hair was already soaked in the horse gang's blood. At this moment, it was sticky and tangled together, just like Ning Kei's conflicted feelings. The campsite was a mess, and there were already a few gaps in the formation of carriages. The horse gang temporarily retreated, but the wave of attack before they retreated still caused great damage to the camp. The camp was full of people and soldiers who were covered in blood and had no eyes. If it weren't for the great River Kingdom's girls, the camp would have been broken by the horse gang. The situation of the horse gang was not much better. At the edge of the low-lying land, not far from the camp, many horses with broken hooves and serious injuries were lying on the cold ground, struggling for their lives. From time to time, they would shake their heavy heads. Under or beside the horses, there were many cold corpses of the horse gang. However, all the wounded members of the horse gang were brought back by their companions. From this, it could be seen that although the horse gang was severely injured, they did not collapse. They still had the ability and spirit to launch another attack. Ning Kei raised his arm to wipe away the trickle of blood between his eyebrows. He turned around to look at the northwest direction of the campsite. The Yin cavalry was fighting with a group of horse gangs as they gradually moved further away. He could not help but shake his head. In the eyes of the people of the Central Plains, the horse bandits of the grasslands were the most ferocious existence in the world. But he, who had dealt with the horse bandits for many years, thought that they were the most cowardly and useless existence in the world. Ferociousness was just a cover for the weakness in their hearts. At this moment, the 600 horse gangs around the meadow were ferocious and dared to directly slaughter the tribes of the palace. If they were timid, a group of Tang soldiers would be able to chase after them. The key was strength. The horse gang was a realistic creature and was most sensitive to the difference in strength. Hence, they were the easiest to break up. Ning Kei thought that he was familiar with the nature of the horse gang. When he chose the campsite last night, he had hidden the geographical advantage and picked the right timing. He had thought that with 200 yen cavalry charging at the side of the horse gang, he would be able to crush the 500 horse gang. However, he had forgotten that the ones charging at the horse gang with him were not his old buddies from the city of Wei, nor were they the Tang cavalry from the West Army of the Blue Water Battalion in the south. They were the Yin cavalry with extremely low combat power. The combat power of the Yin cavalry was even worse than Ning Kei's worst-case scenario. The 200 Yin cavalry had used the geographical advantage to charge at the horse gang. However, they did not manage to scatter the horse gang. They were not even able to penetrate the horse gang and were dragged into a battle with the horse gang. After a few rounds of attacks, dozens of Yin cavalry were killed by the horse gang. If not for the fact that the horse gang's formation was in a mess, this long-planned attack might have caused the Yin cavalry to be completely annihilated. The Yin cavalry and the horse gang fought for a while. Both sides could not take it anymore and temporarily separated. Ninkei took this opportunity to ride the big black horse back to the campsite. On one hand, he did not have much hope for the remaining 100 Yin cavalry. On the other hand, he felt an inexplicable sense of wariness in his heart. A sharp whistle suddenly sounded in the cold air. Ninkei reacted quickly and leaned to the side. An arrow flew past his clothes and hit a carriage wheel, the tail of the arrow shaking violently. He did not care that his black mask was stained with the horse gang's blood and smelled bad. He put the mask back on and took down the boxwood bough on his back. He pulled the string and shot a horse gang member who had rushed to the campsite. Then, he felt a slight soreness in his shoulder. He knew that he had pulled the bough too many times today. If he continued like this, his right arm might be crippled. The horse gang obviously did not want to give the people in the campsite too much time to rest. After a short rest, they attacked fiercely again. They did not care about their own injuries at all. This kind of reckless action that had nothing to do with benefits and risk had exceeded Ninkei's understanding of the horse gang. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. More than 200 horse gang members rushed over from all directions. The civilians, who had already become numb to life and death, gathered unprecedented courage at the last moment of life and death. They carried their crude wooden spears and pierced through the gaps in the formation of the carriages. A wooden spear pierced through the chest of a horse gang member. Blood flowed freely. Then, 3 horse gang members crawled through the formation of carriages. They waved their machetes and hacked the civilians holding the wooden spears until they were covered in blood. A snow-white sword light flashed. The slender and elegant sword chopped at the 3 horse gang members with the sound of sword chi. 1 horse gang member was beheaded on the spot. The other 2 horse gang members had their legs and limbs broken. They retreated awkwardly. Covered in blood, the commoners surged forward like wild beasts, holding wooden sticks and stones that they had picked up from somewhere. They surrounded the 2 horse gang members and smashed them down. They numbly repeated their actions, not knowing how many times they had smashed them. Only when there was no longer any sound from inside did they stiffly stop. After Catgirl chopped against the wind, she habitually let out a cute shout. Then, she was shocked by the bloody scene in front of her. Her red face was covered with dust, but it could not hide the fear and panic in her clear eyes. After all, she was too young and had never seen such a scene. Ninkei grabbed her by the back of her neck and threw her to the back like a cat. He dodged an arrow and held his knife with one hand to block it. Then, he took advantage of the momentum and cut off the right arm of a horse gang member who was sneaking up on him. The horse gang member covered his bleeding right shoulder and knelt on the ground in pain. Ninkei did not even look at him. He held his padao and went to the next dangerous place. He knew that the horse gang member with a broken arm and no knife would be drowned by the civilians in the next moment. So, he did not want to waste any more energy. Once the formation of carriages was broken, everyone in the camp would die. Based on this simple understanding, both the civilians and the soldiers of the Yin Kingdom became extremely valiant at this moment. They took any weapons they could find and desperately attacked the horse gang that climbed over the carriages. But it was the Black Ink Garden disciples from the Great River Kingdom who made the camp hold on for such a long time. These young girls and boys did not have much battlefield experience. Relying on their pride, perseverance, and excellent swordsmanship given by their sex, they slashed out streaks of sword chi in the meadow of the wilderness and killed the troublesome horse gang members. However, there were too many horse gang members and too few Black Ink Garden disciples. Although the civilians and soldiers fought hard, they could not change the overall situation. The camp was surrounded by danger and could be broken through at any time. It seemed that they had reached a desperate situation. At this moment, a clear sound of flute came from the carriage in the center of the camp. Hearing the sound of flute, Zhuji Hua, Catgirl, and other Black Ink Garden disciples became spirited. They did not care about their psyche power and stacked their sword chi to force the horse gang members to retreat. Then, they walked to the grain bags. Hearing the sound of flute and observing these scenes, Ninkei felt a little solemn. There was even a hint of anger in his eyes that were exposed outside the black mask. This was the team that transported the grain to the left tent palace. They were escorted by Yin cavalry and needed mules and horses to transport the grain. Therefore, in addition to many carriages of grain, they also brought a lot of hay for the mules and horses to eat. The unloading boards of the grain wagons formed a circular formation. The cloth bags filled with hay were all gathered under the boards. On the one hand, it was used to strengthen the fortification, and, on the other hand, it could reduce the damage caused by arrows. Hearing the sound of flute, the Black Ink Garden disciples came to the front of these straw bags and used their swords to lift them into the air outside the formation. At this moment, the most concentrated wave of horse gang members attacked again. Not knowing whether it was because of the sword chi of the Black Ink Garden disciples or some other reason, more than 10 bags of hay flew into the air. Suddenly, the cloth bags burst open and fell apart with a hissing sound. The hay in the bag seemed to have been punched hard and scattered around at an extremely fast speed, like a grass rain. At the same time that the sacks of hay burst open and scattered in all directions, an extremely dry smell enveloped the entire camp. In between each sack of hay, a faint spark could be seen faintly shining, and then, in an instant, the entire sky was set ablaze. The grass rain turned into a fire rain and fell from the sky. It covered the light of the eastern sun and turned the entire periphery of the camp into a sea of fire. The horse gang members who were dazed by this strange scene did not even have time to react before they were engulfed by the sea of fire. They became pitiful people who were about to drown or burn to death. The peasants and soldiers in the camp were also stunned by this scene. They held all kinds of weapons and looked at the sea of fire that was so close to them, but none of them flew into the formation of carriages. It was as if they had seen the miracle of Haoyin. Only Ninkei noticed the sudden change in the primordial chi between heaven and earth when the hay bags burst open and burned. He felt the faint talisman power in each bag of hay and even saw the subtle picture when the talisman paper was burning. The talisman fire was ignited by the hay and quickly burned and spread. It fell on the horse gang members and was extremely difficult to extinguish. The horse gang members who rushed to the front of the formation were on fire. They howled miserably and ran around. Some rolled on the ground, but they were still rolling in the fire. Some looked around for clean water, but it was not easy to find water in the winter wilderness. Several horse gang members who were on fire howled and rushed into the formation. They did not even have time to lift their machetes and fell to the ground in pain. The horse gang finally retreated again, leaving dozens of charred bodies outside the camp. Many of the bodies were hugging each other tightly. It was probably the panic before death that made the horse gang members unable to distinguish who was the enemy and who was the friend. A burning smell floated in the air. A cheer of victory echoed in the camp. Ninkei stared at the girl in white in the horse carriage and said, "I have reminded you that you are the strongest among us, and your psyche power is our most precious weapon. You should use it at the most appropriate time and not casually." Mo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him. It was unknown whether it was because she had seen too many bloody scenes or other reasons, but her face was very pale at this time, even whiter than the white dress she was wearing. Many people have died. If I did not help, more people would have died just now. Ninkei looked at her and said, "You are too soft-hearted." Mo Shanshan's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she replied, "I am a woman." Ninkei suppressed his anger and mocked, "You are not married yet." Mo Shanshan calmly replied, "Even if I am married, I will not marry you." Ninkei said after a moment of silence, "If you still have psyche power, you must leave the last bit to me." He was a talisman cultivator and was very clear about the consumption of psyche power by talisman Taoism. The girl's pale and haggard cheeks showed that she had consumed too much psyche power these days. He had to admit that in the whole team, the girl in white was the strongest. Therefore, he could not help but feel angry in the face of such a situation. The horse gang suffered heavy casualties under the fire talisman, but there were at least 200 horse gang members above the meadow who still had the strength to fight. Mo Shanshan's psyche power was exhausted, and his real state was only no doubt state, so he could not resist at all. Of course, Ninkei still had some trump cards to save his life. But things like the primordial 13 arrows and the brocade pouch given to him by his master would be a great waste if they were used on these horse gang members. Before his life was really in danger, he would never use them, even though he was just a little less stingy than Sang Sang. The key was the reinforcements. The grain team camp had lasted for such a long time, but the reinforcements he had imagined never appeared. If he had been sure that there would not be any reinforcements from the beginning, he would have already escaped on the big black horse. Are there any reinforcements? He stared into Mo Shanshan's eyes and asked. Mo Shanshan looked back at him coldly and said, only the reinforcements know. Ninkei did not try to communicate with her anymore and said directly, get ready to break through. My horse can only take one person. I will take Cat Girl, and you will be responsible for your people. Mo Shanshan asked, then what about the Yin soldiers and civilians who have been fighting with you for such a long time? Ninkei answered, I just met them by chance, and we are not comrades. Mo Shanshan shook her head gently and said, I will not leave. Ninkei looked at her and suddenly said, haven't you noticed that the horse gang's target on the meadow is to kill you? Apart from you, who else in the grain team is worth paying such a big price for? Mo Shanshan looked at him and said calmly, if the horse gang's target is me, then these people will die because of me. All the more reason for me not to leave them. Ninkei raised his eyebrows slightly and said, idiot, if you leave, you can attract the horse gang's attention. Then why would the horse gang attack the Yin soldiers and civilians who are not a threat? Mo Shanshan smiled slightly and said, you don't have to lie to me. I now understand how cruel the horse gang is. Ninkei suddenly realized that her usually listless eyes had become exceptionally clear and certain, as if she could easily see through his thoughts. He looked at her for a long time, then turned around and left. The horse gang on the meadow was gathering, and there might be another attack in the next moment. He used his palm to wipe away the coagulated blood on his face and changed into a new mask. As he walked through the camp full of corpses and broken soldiers, both the Yin soldiers and civilians would automatically avoid him when they saw him covered in blood. Even Zhu Jihua and the other girls from the Great River Kingdom looked at him with admiration and fear. Since the battle with the horse gang so far, apart from the fire talisman that burned the sky, the main reason why the grain team could still survive was because of Ning Quebec. He had killed many horse gang members with his padao. Many people saw how he killed the horse gang. He killed people like grass without a sound. What made people feel the most cold and awe-inspiring was the calmness with which he killed the horse gang. This calmness seemed to contain some kind of indifference towards life. Feeling the strange eyes from all around, especially the timid look of Cat Girl, Ninkei did not explain anything. He quietly ordered people to repair the cart array, and at the same time, he used his peripheral vision to observe the surrounding meadow and valley, thinking about the escape route. The horse gang was afraid of death, and so was he. However, he knew a fact better than most horse gang members. The braver you were in the face of death, the more difficult it was for you to die. This was the precious experience gained from countless years of life and death experiences since childhood. As for indifference to life, he had always been indifferent to the lives of the horse gang. The reason why the horse gang by the Shubi Lake was so frightened by him was that he was just an ordinary soldier in the city of Wei. Once he left the city of Wei and entered the wilderness, he was a thief on horseback. Ninkei and his comrades in the city of Wei were horse gang members, the most ferocious kind of horse gang. In those years, he had killed countless horse gang members. If it was at that time, with a world-famous female talisman master behind him, he might have stayed to deal with the horse gang for a while. But not today, because he was a little uneasy. It was not because there were too many horse gang members, nor was it because of the cruel and passive situation. It was because he always felt that someone was watching him, and that person had been watching him for a long time. Not one day, not 2 days, but many days. At the highest point of the meadow in the east, a dozen horse gang members stood quietly, looking down at the chaotic battlefield. Most of the dozen horse gang members arrived last night, and they were the ones who attracted Ninkei's attention. Different from the ordinary horse gang members, they all covered their faces with cloth, as if they did not want others to see their faces. It was obvious that these dozen horse gang members were the leaders of the 600 horse gang members. However, for some unknown reason, the horse gang members kept dying in the valley. Whether they were killed by the Yin cavalry or crushed to death by falling horses, they remained calm. When the burning fire talisman in the camp of the grain team was ignited, most of the dozen horse gang members finally showed shock in their eyes. However, the leader of the horse gang at the front remained absolutely calm. This horse gang leader's eyes were full of vicissitudes, and he was obviously middle-aged. There is indeed a very powerful talisman master in the grain team. Maybe it really is that young talisman master. The disciples of Black Ink Garden are indeed the disciples of the master of calligrapher. Their sword aura is really powerful. The horse gang leader said coldly, but after so many days, even the legendary calligraphy addict's psyche power must be drained. Let the people below prepare to continue the attack. The continuous attack for several days and nights was to drain the psyche power of the young talisman master hidden in the grain team. This leader's plan seemed to be very patient, and now he did not hesitate to let his subordinates use their lives to drain the last of the psyche power of the young talisman master, showing his cold-blooded ruthlessness. Feeling the hesitation of his subordinates, the leader frowned slightly and said coldly, "The Central Plains Coalition Army and the palace are negotiating for peace. Other than the desolate man, the most unlucky ones are your horse gang members. Kill the people we should kill to stop this negotiation. For this goal, it is worth it no matter how many people die." A subordinate said in confusion, "The Palace Chanyu and the Divine Hall will not be fooled by such an obvious trick." The leader said coldly, "What we want is the truth. The truth is more powerful than any other words. As long as we kill these people below, there is no way for this negotiation to continue." The riders on the meadow thought of the bigwig and immediately understood the meaning of the leader's words. The leader looked at a place in the camp and said, "Continue the attack. If the person on the black horse tries to escape from the camp, it is time for us to do it ourselves. Remember, we must ensure that that person is killed in this operation." The riders only knew that the person the leader was talking about was a male disciple of the Black Ink Garden who had previously shown extremely powerful strength. But they did not know the person's real identity, so they were very confused and thought that if they wanted to cause enough shock in the wilderness, the first goal should be to kill the young talisman master in the horse carriage. A horse gang member behind the leader hesitated for a moment, and then he plucked up his courage and said, "Your Excellency, the casualties of our subordinates are too heavy. We really can't fight anymore. If we continue to force them, I'm afraid that these guys will collapse." This title was very strange. It did not seem like a title among horse gangs, but more like an official title. The horse gang leader glanced at him lightly and said, "If you can't command these horse gangs after leading them in the wilderness for nearly 10 years, then what is the use of you living?" The horse gang member felt a chill all over under his gaze and did not dare to say another word. The horse gang leader looked at the camp below and said emotionlessly, "These horse gangs don't know their identity and always think that they are real horse gangs. But you can't forget your identity. Thieves on the horse, soldiers off the horse. And you are the soldiers of the general." Hearing these words, the meadow fell silent. After a long time, someone finally asked, "Your Excellency, how to deal with the young talisman master in the carriage? No matter how strong the calligraphy addict is, she has not entered the knowing destiny state. Once her psyche power is exhausted, how is she different from an ordinary person? And even if she still has the strength to fight, can she stop us from killing that young man?" Since the beginning of the battle, more than 10 cavalrymen who had been quietly standing on the top of the meadow dispersed and gathered their subordinates. They began to prepare for the last and most powerful attack, leaving only the horse gang leader there. The horse gang leader raised his right hand and pressed his bamboo hat lower. He quietly looked at the young man in the Black Ink Garden uniform in the camp below, who was covered in blood with knives and arrows on his back. After a long time of silence, he smiled with mixed feelings. From last year in Chong, and to this moment, he had been secretly watching this man called Ning Ke for a long time. Although he had never found any evidence to prove that Ning Ke was related to the death of the censor Zhang Yuqi, nor did he find that this man was hostile to the general. He did not know why he always felt that this man would be trouble. Because Ning Ke was a suspect, and because Ning Ke had now entered the second floor of the academy, became the only successor of the divine talisman master Yen Sei, and was also favored by his majesty. Therefore, even if there was only one suspicion, they still needed to be very vigilant, especially when Ning Ke came to the frontier fortress of the north of Yin Kingdom. No one knew whether he had secretly received the imperial order or not, and no one knew the deep meaning of the Academy's action. Therefore, trouble became pressure, and it was meaningless to be suspicious. There was no need to investigate whether this man was involved in the death of the censor, and there was no need to investigate whether this man was secretly against the general. They could only and must do one thing, and that was to eliminate the possible threat for the general. Thinking of this, the horse gang leader's complicated smile gradually disappeared. If it were any other time and place, no one would dare to murder a disciple of the second floor of the academy in broad daylight. But now they were in the wilderness, and no one knew the relationship between these horse gang and the general. The imperial court had already suspected the general, and this group of horse gang had to be cleaned up sooner or later. Today, killing Ning Ke, destroying the peace talks, and wiping out this group of horse gang was a wonderful thing. Therefore, when the news of Ning Ke leaving the Blue Water Battalion in disguise and escorting the grain team into the wilderness with the disciples of Black Ingarden reached the general's mansion, he spared no effort and did not sleep for several days and nights to rush here from Tiang City to personally take charge of this matter. This was a good opportunity given by Hao Ian. If he missed it, he would be punished by heaven. However, just when the horse gang was about to launch another attack, Ning Ke was ready to ride away, and the horse gang leader was ready to take advantage of the situation to kill him. There was a burst of dense hoofbeats in the distance of the wilderness meadow. The disciples of Black Ink Garden and the Yin Kingdom soldiers who were vigilantly preparing for battle in the camp under the meadow, and the horse gang who were ready to charge between the meadow and the gentle slope of the meadow, all stopped their respective movements and looked towards the source of the hoofbeats. A group of cavalry came from the meadow in the west. There were not many people in this group of cavalry, about 100. However, both the cavalrymen and the horses under them were wearing gorgeous black armors with golden edges. They looked solemn and imposing, as if there were tens of thousands of cavalry coming together. It was the papal cavalry troop of Divine Hall, known as the strongest cavalry in the world. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers under the meadow. The horse gang quickly retreated and lined up, ready to retreat. However, what happened next was out of everyone's expectation. An old hand stretched out from a carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. The 100 cavalrymen of Divine Hall slowly stopped and looked at this side indifferently from thousands of feet away. They did not immediately attack the horse gang. People in the camp of the grain team looked at that side in astonishment. The cheers gradually subsided and became dead silent. Some people guessed the intention of this group of cavalrymen of Divine Hall, and their faces showed a look of disbelief and indignation. I didn't stop writing. I wrote 12,000 words today. The task on Tuesday is finished. Oh, I only need to write 8,000 words tomorrow. How happy I am. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 220. At this time, the morning sun had already climbed up to the sky, bringing a rare trace of warmth to the wilderness. On the meadow, hundreds of cavalrymen of Divine Hall stood silently and solemnly. Their black armor was painted with complex golden patterns, which were difficult to understand, shining with holy light under the sun. The flags in front of the formation were fluttering in the wind, looking extremely solemn and holy. This group of cavalrymen was the world-famous cavalrymen of West Hill Divine Hall, also known as the Apologetic Divine Army. They left West Hill a few months ago and arrived at the frontier fortress of the wilderness via capital Chung of Yin Kingdom. This time, they were ordered by the Divine Hall to escort some distinguished bigwigs to the palace to participate in the negotiation. It was also the team that Mo Shanshan had mentioned to Ning Quebec. The night before, they had already seen the warning fireworks shot from the camp of the grain team and received the Fu text message asking for help through other means. However, perhaps because the wilderness was remote and dangerous, this team of cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not immediately rush to help. Instead, they followed the original route steadily until they met in the meadow valley that had evolved from the ancient river. Among the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, there were more than 10 monks of Uelluan Kingdom and students of Revelation Institute, as well as a horse carriage. The door of the carriage opened, and a small foot wearing cyan cloth shoes stepped on the carriage board. It was an old woman with a wrinkled face, wearing a very strange robe that seemed to be made of countless different kinds of cloth. It looked extremely thin, and no one knew how it could withstand the cold wind in the wilderness. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted the students of the Revelation Institute and the disciples of the White Tower Temple of Uelluan Kingdom to the palace. It was also a kind of trial, and this woman was the leader of this team because she was the highly respected aunt of Uelluan Kingdom, Cunimati. Due to historical reasons, the relationship between Uelluan Kingdom and Great River Kingdom had always been very bad. A few days ago, in the frontier fortress of Northern Yin Kingdom in the south, there was some friction because of the warm stream. Aunt Cunimati, who was said to be extremely vengeful and narrow-minded, directly ordered the girls of Black Ink Garden of Great River Kingdom to undertake such a dangerous mission through the Divine Hall. At this time, looking at the besieged disciples of Black Ink Garden below the valley, she naturally had no impulse to rescue them. But after all, she was a senior Vedanta in the cultivation world and had to maintain the dignity and glory of Divine Hall. Naturally, she would not directly express her intention in front of everyone. Cunimati looked at the messy camp below the valley, not far away. There was no emotion on her face. Every wrinkle on her face was filled with coldness and strangeness. Her voice was hoarse and sharp, which sounded very uncomfortable. Fu text message. I don't know who the Fu text message is, the talisman master in the grain team of the camp. Of talisman text message. I don't know who the Fu text message in the camp is. Of Talisoff the grain team camp. We not of the defense. Of it. And of. Not far below the meadow, the camp of the grain team was covered with corpses and blood. The formation of carriages was about to collapse, and the horse gang on the gentle slope in the northeast had already assembled and were ready to launch another attack. Everyone knew that the people in the camp were about to collapse, but Cunimati made such a statement, which was equivalent to lying through her teeth. However, neither the monks of the White Tower Temple nor the students of the Revelation Institute seemed to hear what she said. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly nodded to show that he understood. His indifferent face did not show any strange emotion. How Taoism and Buddhism sect had always been on good terms, especially in recent years, because of the priest of the judicial department, Prince Long Qing. The relationship between West Hill and Uelluan Kingdom became closer. As the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, he was personally led by the priest. Therefore, he had always respected Aunt Cunimati's opinion. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not want to lead his subordinates to rescue those people below the meadow. He had to protect the Revelation Institute students and the White Tower Temple monks in the formation, especially the noble girl in the carriage. If he rashly attacked and scared her, how could he explain to the priest? Although he was a master in the see-through realm and his 100 divine cavalrymen were the most powerful elite divine cavalrymen in the world, there were at least 200 or 300 horse gangs on the meadow. If he wanted to kill all the horse gangs, he would be injured. The life of every cavalryman of Divine Hall was extremely precious. They could only bleed for the dignity and glory of the Divine Hall. How could they risk their lives for those lowly people below the meadow? Moreover, the Great River Kingdom was close to the Tang Empire. The West Hill Divine Palace had been dissatisfied with them for many years. At this time, it was reasonable to let them suffer. As for the people and cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom, they were the direct descendants of Crown Prince Yin Chongming and had nothing to do with the priest. It did not matter even if many of them died. As for the face and morality of the Divine Hall, the commander thought indifferently. Seeing that the apologetic divine army was here, the horse gangs would be sensible and would not go too far. Moreover, whatever the Divine Hall thought was right, it was right and could not be questioned. The commander slowly raised his right hand and gently waved it forward, indicating that the cavalrymen were divided into 3 teams: the front, the middle, and the back. They slowly dispersed along the edge of the meadow and made a downward movement, but obviously they were not ready to fight. In the camp below the meadow, there were faint cries and curses of despair. Listening to those dirty words, Kunimatti's face became more and more gloomy. Her wrinkles gradually overflowed with anger. She said in a cold voice, "A group of lowly people who don't know their manners. I like to see how capable the disciples of the master of calligrapher are." The cavalrymen of Divine Hall guarded the carriage in the center and remained very quiet. A beautiful girl sat calmly on the soft couch and was concentrating on picking the stamens for a pot of orchids in front of her. No one knew how she took care of the delicate orchids in the cold wilderness, but it was a pity that the girl herself was as quiet and pure as orchids. She actually took away all the colors of the pot of orchids. The camp of the grain team and the horse gang had been fighting fiercely since the early morning. They were already exhausted, and the groans of more than 100 wounded people gradually died down. Countless corpses were placed in the middle of the camp. The carriages were badly damaged, and some of them were scorched black. They looked shaky and could not withstand another attack from the horse gang. The people in the camp had already fallen into despair. At this time, they suddenly saw a cavalryman of Divine Hall coming from meadow. They thought they saw hope, so they were ecstatic and even burst into tears. Mo Shan, who had been sitting silently in the carriage, put down her writing brush and finally relaxed after confirming the arrival of the reinforcements. However, after waiting for a moment, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow slowly advanced, but did not come to help or charge. The cheers in the camp involuntarily subsided, and people became very confused and uneasy. Some Yin soldiers realized that the formation of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall should be used to suppress, not to attack. This speculation spread to everyone in the camp at a very fast speed and immediately led to a new round of despair and pain. They saw hope in despair, but then fell into despair again and watched the hope not far away fall into despair. No matter how strong-willed they were, no matter how pious they were to Haotian Taoism, and no matter how respectful they were to the Divine Hall, they could not help crying and then becoming angry. Countless cries and curses sounded in the camp. It was noisy. People used all the dirty words they could think of to curse the cold-blooded cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow to vent their despair and anger. Zhuozhuo tightly pursed her lips, looking at the cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow and the old woman in a cloth robe in front of them. Although she did not speak, her eyes were burning with the flame of hatred. Her right shoulder was cut by the horse gang's scimitar. After a simple dressing, it was still bleeding. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden were sent to the wilderness by the Divine Hall to carry out such a difficult task. It was because of the old woman of the Yueloan kingdom that the disciples of the Black Ink Garden were sent by the Divine Hall to the wilderness to carry out such a difficult task. But today, in the face of a desperate situation, the old woman completely ignored the friendship of the righteous faction and looked on coldly. It was really shameful. Cat Girl said angrily, "That old woman is a bastard. But how can the cavalrymen of Divine Hall not help her? Don't they know that they will be punished by the judicial department for disobeying the doctrine?" Zhuozhuo showed a disdainful look and fiercely spat at her feet. She thought that the cavalrymen of Divine Hall were originally under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. Who dared to say that they disobeyed the doctrine and behaved shamelessly? Ninkei lifted his bamboo hat and looked above the meadow. This was the first time for him to see the real appearance of the papal guardians of West Hill Divine Palace. Thinking of the legendary brightness and majesty of his cavalrymen and their actions at this time, he could not help but have some mixed feelings. In any case, these disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom are here to help the Yin Kingdom under the edict of the Divine Hall. Why are these cavalrymen of Divine Hall not willing to help? Ning Ke touched his bloody face and thought with emotion. It turns out that there are people in this world who are more shameless than me. After all, I still underestimated the shamelessness of this world. The arrival of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall also had a great impact on the horse gang. Although they obviously did not intend to help the camp under the meadow, the prestige of the apologetic Divine Army had spread far and wide. Even though there were only 100 cavalrymen, they still frightened hundreds of horse gang and dared not to act rashly. The battle formation shrank, and several leaders rode back to the meadow to ask for orders. Facing the pressure of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, the horse gang suddenly became nervous. One of them asked for instructions in a slightly trembling voice. "Your Excellency, we can't defeat the people from the Divine Hall. We'd better retreat. Even if we can kill those people in the camp, I'm afraid that it will be disadvantageous to the general if the Divine Hall finds out that we are involved in this matter." The leader of the horse gang indifferently looked at the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance. His complicated laughter came out from the mask. "Do you want to wait for both sides to be disabled before taking action?" After so many years, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall are still so petty and meticulous. I really don't know why they are so famous. Then he looked at the subordinates beside him and said calmly, "Even if we all die, how can the Divine Hall find out who we are? Don't you know how to scratch all your faces before you die?" One of the important purposes of the leader of the horse gang to besiege the grain team was to exhaust all the horse gang to death. Naturally, he would not cherish the lives of his subordinates. As for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in the distance on the meadow, he was not afraid at all. It was said that the apologetic Divine Army of Divine Hall was the most elite cavalry in the world. But as an important figure of the Empire's border army, he would not take them seriously. Even if there were hidden strong cultivators among them, they should not be determined to stop him at a great cost according to the current situation. "Let's go down together." The leader of the horse gang gently lifted the reins and kicked the horse's belly with his heels. Then he slowly went down the meadow. A moment ago, Ninkei was ready to escape. A moment later, Ninkei saw the arrival of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. Since then, he did not need to escape anymore. The next moment, Ninkei saw the cavalrymen of Divine Hall under the bright armor and decided not to escape anymore. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall on the meadow happened to block the best escape route he had planned. But this was not the main reason why he decided to stay and fight with the girls of the Great River Kingdom. If the cavalrymen of Divine Hall came to help at this time, they would be exhausted and the horse gang would definitely be defeated. Of course, there would be casualties among the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, but there would be less casualties among the more than 200 people in the camp. The reason why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall did not move forward was that these cavalrymen of Divine Hall and those unknown nobles valued their lives much more than the lives of these common people. The Divine Hall was famous for its light, but they behaved so shamelessly. Although he sometimes behaved shamelessly, he was still ashamed to be classified as the cavalryman of Divine Hall. Moreover, he was very clear that these cavalrymen of Divine Hall were the subordinates of Prince Longqing, and he and Prince Longqing could only stand on the two sides of the river at any time and in any place. Moreover, the vigilance and uneasiness from the horse gang still existed. He still felt that someone was indifferently watching him. Under the gaze of the Divine Hall, he could not get rid of this vigilance and uneasiness, so he had to erase this emotion. Walking to the side of the horse carriage and looking at the big package quietly lying on the carriage board, Ninkei frowned. Thinking that the people of the Divine Hall above the meadow were watching here, he decided not to use the primordial 13 arrows. Because according to Second Brother, the lowest standard for him to use the primordial 13 arrows in the wilderness was Prince Longqing. He pulled out something that looked like a stick tightly wrapped in coarse cloth. At this time, of course, he had to carry something to save his life. "Can you still use talismans?" Ninkei looked at Emo Shanshan's pale face and asked. Emo Shanshan raised her head and looked at him as if she was looking at the horse gang that was regrouping. She did not answer him, but slowly raised her right hand and held a piece of yellowish paper between her two slender fingers. Ninkei's eyes fell on the yellow paper between her slender fingers, and then he said, "This time, you have to cooperate well and be fierce enough." Emo Shanshan withdrew her gaze, her eyelashes resting quietly on her white skin, and nodded. Ninkei jumped off the horse carriage and reached out to call Catgirl. He said, "It's meaningless to keep food and water at this time. Go and prepare a big bucket of water for me." Cat Girl did not understand, but went to prepare the water. He led the big black horse to the periphery of the camp. At first, his pace was very gentle. Then it became a trot. Gradually, it became a trot. He turned over and rode on the horse's belly, urging the big black horse to rush out like a black lightning. Like an arrow, it rushed directly to the horse gang leader who had just come down from the meadow. The boxwood bowstring vibrated slightly. An arrow was the first to fly out. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chijian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:21. Ninkei's archery was the best in the world. Whether it was the grassland barbarians who were good at riding and shooting, or the horse gang who relied on bows and arrows for a living, they were no match for him. In addition to his accuracy and skill in controlling the bow, the speed of the arrow was even more amazing. At this moment, he suddenly pulled the bow and shot the arrow with the momentum of running forward. The arrow was as fast as lightning. The bowstring of the boxwood bow was still slightly trembling in the wind, but the arrowhead had already flown in front of the horse gang leader's face and was about to hit him. At this critical moment, a small round shield came from the side of the horse gang leader and blocked the arrow by a hair's breadth. The muffled sound was like the beating of a drum. The horse gang holding the shield gave a muffled groan, and his mount took 2 steps back. The horse gang leader behind the shield not only did not dodge, but his expression did not change at all. It was not because Ninkei's arrow was too fast for him to react, but because he knew that the arrow could not hurt him. At that moment, the horse gang leader and his trusted subordinates came down from the meadow and entered the horse gang who had already set up a charging formation, causing some chaos. Ninkei saw the right opportunity and thought that he could hurt the other party. He did not expect that the other party could so easily block the arrow. It was obvious that the other party was well prepared. Ninkei could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The muffled sound of the arrows piercing deep into the round shields was like a signal to charge. Under the stimulation of the great rewards and the threat of severe punishment, the 200 mounted bandits who were still able to mount their horses and fight in the open shouted crazily. They waved the scimitars in their hands and followed the leader of the 10 or so mounted bandits at the front as they charged toward the camp of the grain team. Because the distance was shortened in advance, the gravel area at the edge of the meadow could no longer stop the horse gang's charge. The outside of the camp of the grain team was already in ruins. The surviving 200 soldiers and civilians of Yin Kingdom stood in front of their seriously injured companions and the corpses of their companions. Their bloody hands holding the weapons trembled slightly, and their eyes were filled with despair. The disciples of Black Ink Garden who were guarding the breach still could not recover their strength after this period of rest. Their psyche power was almost exhausted, and they could not even hold their swords in their hands. How could they resist? In the carriage at the back, the young girl, Emo Shanshan, lowered her head slightly. A few strands of black hair hung weakly in front of her forehead. Her pale cheeks made her look particularly haggard. Her fingers secretly gripped the ink brush so tightly that they turned white. She looked so weak. The horse gang rushed to the camp. It seemed that no one could stop the coming massacre. Only Ninkei rode the big black horse and rushed to the horse gang like a tide. He looked brave, but he was only one person. What could he do? Ninkei saw the masked leader at the forefront of the horse gang through the damaged carriage board. Their eyes finally met in the cold air of the wilderness. Somehow, Ninkei felt that his heart was beating faster. The vigilance and uneasiness that had troubled him for a long time became stronger and stronger. However, at this moment, there was no time for him to think, ponder, or hesitate. He was already on the horse, so he had to bring out the spirit of a thief on the horse, draw his bow, and swing his sword to kill everyone. The big black horse's breath was heavy, but it did not slow down. In the blink of an eye, it had rushed to the front of the carriage. At this moment, Ninkei abandoned his bow and reached for the hilt behind him, shouting. He did not shout any specific words. It was just a very simple explosive sound, like the roar of some beasts in the mountains. However, he believed that the young girl in the carriage should be able to understand what he wanted to express. Although they had not discussed it in advance, he did not know why he felt that she should understand, just like Sang Sang. And Mo Shan Shan, who was in the carriage, understood. The black hair hanging in front of her forehead slightly narrowed, and her two slender fingers gently pressed together, like two stones heavily hitting each other. The yellowish talisman paper between her fingers actually broke into countless small pieces in an instant, as fine as yellow sand, and then disappeared. In the wilderness in front of the camp and the carriage, the chi of heaven and earth suddenly fluctuated violently. An extremely dry smell suddenly appeared. The horse gang, who had been seriously injured before, felt this horrible smell and subconsciously pulled the reins, trying to avoid to the sides. There were no sparks and no dry grass. Right in front of the broken formation of wagons, a raging fire appeared out of nowhere. The fierce tongues of fire leaped up with every breath of the wind in the wilderness, and in the midst of ostentatiously growing a few centimeters, forming a wall of fire. In fact, the power of the fire talisman master's burning fire talisman was not as strong as before. After all, she had consumed too much psyche power. It was just that she had to defend against the horse gang's attacks from all directions, so the area covered by the fire talisman was too large. This time, the fire talisman only needed to cover a few feet in front of the big black horse, so it seemed particularly fierce. The wall of fire outside the camp was powerful, but in fact, it did not cause much damage to the horse gang. Moreover, it just happened to block in front of the big black horse, as if it was going to swallow the big black horse and Ning K on it. Just before the big black horse was about to rush into the wall of fire, Ning K turned over and mounted on the horse. He heavily stamped his feet on the saddle, and the muscles of his waist, abdomen, and legs suddenly tightened and released. He jumped up suddenly. The big black horse roared violently, and the tip of its hooves deeply pressed into the mud. It forcibly stopped its heavy body. When it was about to touch the wall of fire, it changed its running track dangerously and rubbed the wall of fire to the right to avoid. At this time, Ninkei had already jumped over the wall of fire. The soles of his boots rubbed the horrible tongue of fire, and he jumped over there. He held the hilt on his back with both hands and took advantage of the momentum to pull forward. With two clangs, the padao was unsheathed. The wall of fire blocked the sight of the horse gang, so they did not see Ning K jump from the back of the horse. When they saw Ning K jump over the wall of fire, Ning K had already arrived in the air in front of the horse gang leader. Before the battle, he had told Mo Shan Shan that the horse gang would be in chaos if they killed the leader who just arrived last night. And if the horse gang was in chaos at this time, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall would never miss such a great opportunity. He was sure that these people in Divine Hall were as shameless as him, so he could guess what they would choose. So he did not hesitate to let the weak young talisman master squeeze out the last psyche power to create this opportunity. He was very good at jumping over the wall of fire and making a sudden attack. When he killed Xiaoho's group of 3 people outside the entrance of Northern Mountain Road, he had done this. So he was very confident. He stared at the horse gang leader attentively and calmly, and the padao in his hands turned into 2 bright blades of light and chopped down firmly and persistently. However, when he jumped out of the wall of fire and met the eyes of the horse gang leader again in the air, he found that the eyes of the horse gang leader seemed to be even more attentive and calm than his. The coldness in his heart when he was sprinting before could not help but increase. The 2 padaos cut through the winter wind of the wilderness and chopped at the neck of the horse gang leader. However, the horse gang on the left and right sides of the horse gang leader seemed to have already known the direction of Ning K's blade and made a prediction in advance. They stretched out 2 thick wooden shields to block the blade. 2 heavy muffled sounds reverberated, and numerous cracks suddenly appeared on the wooden shields like spider webs. Ning K, who had no leverage in the air, was also shaken to the air diagonally backward by the countershock force. The 2 padaos were wedged between the wooden shields and could not be pulled back, because the horse gang's mounts were still moving forward. When Ning K fell from the air for the second time, he just happened to rush directly to the horse gang leader. In the air, his right hand reached behind him like lightning and pulled out the 3rd blade. And almost at the same time, a spark burst in front of the horse gang leader. Although it was not vigorous, it was enough to burn his face. It was the talisman Taoism ability that Ning Ke had hidden. An invisible force appeared in the air, tightly wrapping the ball of fire, transformed from the fu paper. The sparks suddenly became weak, as if they were sealed by a transparent glass ball. The fire rubbed the shoulder of the horse gang leader weakly and fell down. The horse gang leader turned over his right hand, and a hard metal shield appeared in the air, which happened to block Ning Ke's third blade with all his strength. The blade and the shield collided with each other and made a loud noise, shaking the air for a while. The three Padeos were all predicted and sealed in advance, and the talisman Taoism secretly used was also cracked. The horse gang leader seemed to know all his means and had a plan to deal with him. In a flash, he finally understood one thing. The target of these horse gang following the grain team was not to rob the grain, nor the young talisman master in the horse carriage, but himself from the beginning to the end. In the cold winter wind of the wilderness, Ning Ke's body and mood were extremely cold. Coldness did not mean despair, and he had never given up such a thing in his mind. He was in the air with a muffled sound. The psyche power in his sense of perception was forced out, and the fine talisman on the Padao in his hand suddenly brightened. At the same time, the talisman on the other two Padeos embedded in the wooden shields was also brightened. With a few crisp sounds, the wooden shields were all broken, and the two Padeos fell to the ground. And the third Padao in his hand chopped against the wind, with a bright blade light, rolling the aura between heaven and earth, and chopped the horse gang leader again. Black sand flew all over the ground, and a very deep blade mark appeared on the ground. But the horse gang leader was safe and sound. Ning Ke's blade that contained the chi of heaven and earth actually chopped the ground. His vision was blurred, and he suddenly felt something was wrong. But he had no time to make any response. His body suddenly flew into the air again, and blood suddenly sprayed out from his mouth and nose. The horse gang leader slightly raised his head and indifferently looked at Ning Ke, who was spraying blood in the air. His left hand that had been hanging beside the saddle stopped to calculate quickly, and he thought to himself, "I took the risk to approach you, and finally locked you." Ning Ke flew in the air, and blood sprayed out from his mouth and nose like a fountain. A very vigorous and powerful psyche power, following an invisible track, rose from the ground, penetrated the air, pierced between his eyebrows, and directly drilled into his sense of perception. It seemed that there were countless needles stirring quickly in his brain, and an indescribable and absolute pain made his body tremble violently. He was a person who was good at enduring pain. Even the psyche power attack on the difficult mountain road in the Academy's back mountain did not make him fall down. But the psyche power from the ground was so strong that even he could not bear it, and his consciousness instantly became blurred. Before falling into a coma or dying, the instinctive inertia that he had developed in the past 10 years of life and death made his hand subconsciously stretch to his back and wanted to hold the familiar umbrella handle. However, under the attack of the powerful psyche power, his hand barely touched the umbrella handle, and there was no way to pull it out. His body began to fall. He struggled to open his eyes and looked at the ground with blurred vision. Looking at the horse gang leader who was looking up at him indifferently, he finally confirmed that this person was actually a psyche master in the upper see-through state. A psyche master in the upper see-through state was so noble and powerful. If he entered the military camp, he would be a general. If he entered the imperial court, he would be a minister of offerings. He would be respected in the world. Why would such a person pretend to be a horse gang to kill him? Ning Ke knew that he had underestimated the enemy. If he had known that the enemy's target was himself and that the opponent was a horrifying psyche master, he would definitely have used the primordial 13 arrows at the beginning. Although Second Brother had said so, the strength of the horse gang leader was not much weaker than that of Prince Longqing. The horse gang leader, or Lin Ling, the psyche master of the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, slightly raised his head and squinted at Ning Ke, who was spitting blood in the air. His eyes were full of complex emotions, including complacency, fear, and pride. If the military wanted to investigate a person, they would definitely dig out all his background. The strength and fighting habits that Ning Ke showed at the entrance of the Northern Mountain Road and the fact that he followed Master Yin, say, to learn talisman Taoism were all in his plan. A psyche master in the upper see-through state fought against a beginner in the no-doubt state who had made such careful and meticulous preparation. If he still could not kill the opponent, it could only mean that Hao Yin was too unreasonable. However, seeing that Ning Ke was about to die, Lin Ling still felt a little proud. Because although he was the most powerful psyche master in the Northeast Border Military, the person he killed today was a student of the second floor of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. So he was proud, but also timid. So he decided that when he confirmed Ning Ke's death, he must immediately kill the confidants around him and himself, so that this matter would not bring any trouble to the general. The carriage in the camp, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly moved. Its movement was earth-shattering. The whole carriage disintegrated and scattered, and the curtain, wood, and metal ornaments were shot around like arrows. The carriage burst open, and the girl in white floated into the air. Her waterfall-like black hair was flying in the wind. She looked at the firewall, and her unfocused eyes suddenly condensed. Two extremely abnormal blushes appeared on her pale cheeks, and she stretched out a finger. Her slender finger drew a few lines in the cold winter wind of the wilderness. The fingertip broke the air, the wind, and the heaven and earth, and an invisible force was generated with the drawing of the lines. Only the divine talisman master who had entered the knowing destiny state could draw the infinitive talisman. The girl in white's fingers trembled violently, as if she was suffering great pain. In the end, she could not finish the talisman and only finished half of it. She indifferently glanced at the firewall and could vaguely see Ning Ke's figure falling at high speed. She closed her eyes, leaned back, and fell to the ground. The unfinished talisman in the winter wind suddenly collapsed, and so did the surrounding space. In a very short time, it condensed into a transparent air mass. The invisible and transparent talisman power, like the fist of the god of heaven, violently rushed out from dozens of feet away and broke a huge hole in the firewall. More than 10 horse gang members spat out blood and fell off their horses. The horse gang leader's pupils shrank sharply. Even though he was a psyche master at the upper see-through state, he also felt the horror of this power. Even though this talisman was not finished, it was still the infinitive talisman that only the divine talisman master could understand. Divine talisman. Wednesday's task was completed. I'm really trying my best. Everyone, please stimulate me. I don't need tickets, just a few compliments. Please don't criticize or remind me recently. With my current mental state and ability, this is the best I can write. I try my best to ensure the quality and quantity. Criticism and suggestions have always been useless to me, and they can't help me write better, but compliments can really help. Good night. I wish everyone happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 222. The commander of cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked down at the meadow without any expression on his face. He did not care about the life and death of the people in the camp of the grain team. He just wanted to see if there would be a suitable opportunity for him to send troops in a chaotic situation. Suddenly, a violent vibration of the chi of heaven and earth came from the meadow. The powerful and wonderful aura of talisman Taoism directly and clearly reflected in his sense of perception, which made his expression change dramatically. Maddie, the old lady, was as hard as stone. When she saw the horse gang waving their machetes to kill the Yin soldiers who had no time to escape, the wrinkles on her face did not even tremble a little. But when the carriage was broken into pieces and the girl in white floated in the air to draw the talisman, the wrinkles on her face suddenly changed from the lines carved on the stone to the tangles in the wind. They all piled up together, and she looked extremely shocked. The talisman master in the camp is actually her. She can actually draw the infinitive talisman? Has she already entered the knowing destiny state? Maddie looked gloomy and looked back at the carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen. She secretly thought about how her niece, who was spoiled and treasured by her, would react if she knew this fact. The curtain of the carriage was closed. The girl, who was as quiet and pure as an orchid, felt the terrible talisman power from the meadow. She slowly raised her head and revealed a trace of understanding on her face. She whispered to herself, "It turns out to be Sister Mo." Through the curtain, she could guess who the talisman master was just by the fluctuation of the talisman power. It seemed that this flower-like girl was not ignorant of what happened under the meadow outside the carriage. The half-divine talisman turned into an invisible high-speed air mass. Like a giant fist made by a god, it instantly tore the air above the camp and punched a huge hole in the wall of fire. More than 10 horse gang members were killed by the shock. Then it came to the horse gang leader and suddenly condensed with the winter wind. The leader of the horse gang knew that his life was at stake at this critical moment. With a muffled groan, his fingers hanging on the side of the saddle trembled violently. His thumb tapped on the lines of his middle and index fingers at high speed, forcing out all the psyche power in his sense of perception. The strong psyche power accumulated by decades of meditation left his body and fiercely collided with the power of the divine talisman. The strange power collided, causing the air around the horse gang leader to have countless strange white lines. These white lines were extremely fine turbulence in the air. Because of the difference in speed with the surrounding airflow, it caused the light to be refracted greatly, which was why it appeared white. Being able to tear the seemingly empty air to such an unbearable extent and make it howl in the tiniest of places, one could imagine how terrifying the collision between the half-divine talisman and the Psyche Master's decades of cultivation power was. In the countless air turbulence that was like willow catkins dancing wildly, a few drops of blood splashed out from the corner of the eyes of the leader of the horse gang. The horse under him was whining and retreating in disorder. Because this incomplete divine talisman was too powerful, the horse gang leader had to concentrate all his psyche power to fight against it. Naturally, there was a very short period of blankness in the psyche power attack of Ning K, who was falling from the sky while spurting blood. The tens of thousands of steel needles in Ning K's sense of perception suddenly disappeared. The pain remained in his consciousness, but he finally woke up from the blurred state for a moment. All he needed was a moment of clarity. He pulled out the big black umbrella on his back. With a shake of his wrist, the coarse cloth was torn. The big black umbrella, wrapped in layers of cloth, which had not seen the sun for several months, suddenly saw the light again. Like a black lotus, it bloomed on top of his head. The big black umbrella slowed down his falling speed, so that he would not fall to his death. More importantly, the big black umbrella looked extremely greasy and dirty, but actually absorbed most of the horrible psyche power attack from below. His body was still floating in the air, and Ning K's hand holding the padao had already waved over. At this time, there was still some distance between him and the horse gang leader below, so the padao could not cut him. But a silver needle broke through the air from his wrist. Like the scenes that happened every day in the back of the mountain of the academy, it followed the strange and elusive dark lines and directly pierced the eyes of the horse gang leader. The horse gang leader was a psyche master in the upper see-through state, and his cultivation state was similar to that of the girl in white, Mo Shan Shan. But it was still difficult for him to deal with the incomplete divine talisman, and his whole body was bound by the dangerous primordial chi turbulence in the air. What was more, he did not expect that Ning K, who was seriously injured and about to die, would still hide such a sinister move. Seeing that the extremely dim and almost invisible silver thread was about to pierce his eyes, he could not avoid it. He could only take the risk of ignoring the turbulence in front of him and forced himself to lower his head. With a poof, the silver needle instantly pierced into his brow bone. The end of the silver needle could not be seen, and a drop of blood, like a red mole, suddenly appeared in it. The horse gang leader only felt a sharp pain in his head, and he could not help but blacked out. The blacking out was not completely caused by the injury caused by the pain, but really blacked out, because the big black umbrella floated over. Under the big black umbrella, the padao in Ning K's hand directly chopped out, and the momentum of the knife was concise and clear. The blade entered the flesh and then broke the bone. It was just a matter of a moment. With a swish, the arm flew to the sky. A terrible bloody wound appeared on the right shoulder of the horse gang leader, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The momentum of the padao was not exhausted. He cried out in pain and fell to the rear of the horse, falling heavily to the ground. Just before landing, his skinny right hand pointed to Ning K, who was about to fall on his back, and suddenly opened it. Ning-Ke was seriously injured again, and his chest and abdomen were suffocated. He spat out blood again and fell down. He just fell on the horse that originally belonged to the horse gang leader. He did not feel the sweet and fishy taste between his lips and tongue. Before his consciousness was blurred, the padao in his hand broke the wind and chopped again. But it was not the horse gang leader who had been shaken off, but the horse's buttocks. A deep bloody wound suddenly appeared on the horse's buttocks. The horse was shocked by the pain and madly rushed forward, bumping into the still-burning wall of fire. There was another hole below the transparent hole in the wall of fire in front of the camp, which was pierced by the divine talisman. A burning galloping horse, carrying the seriously injured and weak Ning-Ke, roared out of the hole. The horse's mane and tail had already been burned to ashes, and the galloping horse's body was spitting fire. The fire caused by the burning fire talisman was extremely terrible. The galloping horse forcibly rushed through and was instantly burned to death, falling heavily to the ground. Ning-Ke on the horse's back fell to the ground with a bang at the same time, rolling several times continuously before stopping. Although he was protected by the big black umbrella, the corners of his clothes were still spitting fire, which could be ignited at any time. He sat on the ground awkwardly, turned his head to look at a place, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Water!" According to his previous instructions, Catgirl prepared a large bucket of water and waited by his side. She had not participated in the defense. Seeing her senior sisters fighting with the horse gang, she was so anxious that she wanted to kick over the bucket of water. She did not expect that the battle situation would change so quickly, and it was not until now that she understood Ning-Ke's previous intention. With a splash, the whole bucket of water was poured on Ning-Ke's body. The burning fire on his clothes was instantly extinguished, and his weak body was directly knocked to the ground by the bucket of water that was poured on his head. The big black horse galloped from one side of the camp to the front of him. It lowered its head and kept nudging Ning-Ke's body, looking very anxious and uneasy. It seemed that it was worried that after Ning-Ke fell down, he would never be able to stand up again. Ning-Ke fell on the wet ground and indeed had no strength to stand up. Fortunately, he did not pass out. He opened his eyes and looked at the horse's face that was very close to his face, and a very difficult smile appeared on his face. Since the beginning of the war, especially when he assassinated the leader of the horse gang, he had encountered countless extremely dangerous situations and innumerable pain. According to the requirements of human instinct, when faced with the pain that the body and spirit could not bear, he would automatically pass out. However, he seemed to have some kind of talent that went against the body's instinct and forcibly maintained the last trace of consciousness. He raised his right arm with difficulty and put the big black umbrella that looked dirtier than before on his chest. Then he put the brocade bag that had been tied on his middle finger into his arms. After doing these two things, he was really relieved, but still did not pass out because of mental relaxation. He stabbed the tip of the knife into the wet land beside him and stood up with a muffled groan. Looking at the fighting sounds coming from the camp, he wanted to go and help, but found that his body, which had been seriously injured by the psyche power, did not listen to his orders. He had done what he should do, so he should not die, right? As for those people who were bathed in blood and fighting around the carriage array, he could not change anything at this time. Thinking of something, Ning-Ke looked back. In the middle of the messy camp, the carriage that had already collapsed into pieces was only left with a board at the bottom. Mo Shanshan was currently sitting on that board. Her white robes were covered in mud for an unknown amount of time. The young talisman master had previously forcibly used the divine talisman that only divine talisman masters could use, which was beyond her state ability. She had suffered a very serious backfire, and the psyche power in her sense of perception had been squeezed out, so she directly passed out in the air and fell down. Perhaps because of the shock, Mo Shanshan had already woken up at this time. She slightly lowered her head, and the black hair on her forehead was very messy. Her right hand was pressed on the ground to support her body, and the slender eyelashes vaguely visible among her hair kept trembling. Her pale cheeks were full of weakness, and it seemed that she would faint again at any time. Suddenly there came a faint sound like thunder in the distance. Looking at the smoke and dust above the meadow, Ning-Ke knew that the team of cavalrymen of Divine Hall was tempted as he had expected. He said to Catgirl beside him, when cleaning up the battlefield later, grab my 2 knives for me." The firewall in front of the camp was mainly to create a chance for Ning Ke to assassinate the leader of the horse gang. The coverage area was not large, and it was far from enough to stop those horse gangs. During the time of the previous Tangled battle, the horse gang rushed in, waving their cutlasses and whistling. At this time, the array of carriages composed of carriage boards and grain bags had long been damaged. The Black Ink Garden disciples' knives were like snow, and they resolutely fought against them without retreating. Those soldiers and civilians of Yin Kingdom suffered heavy casualties in a very short time. At this time, the leader of the horse gang was nowhere to be found. It was unknown whether he was seriously injured and taken away by his trusted subordinates, or he was already dead, and his body was trampled into mud by the hooves of the horses. This fact brought a great impact to the horse gang. The charging formation of the horse gang was already in a mess, but the defense power in the camp was also on the verge of a desperate situation. If the cavalrymen of Divine Hall above the meadow still did not move at this time, then no one could predict whether the camp would be massacred first or the horse gang would collapse first under the pressure. The bigwigs on the meadow were all shocked by Mo Shanshan's shocking half-divine talisman, so they did not pay much attention to Ning Ke, who jumped over the firewall and finally killed the leader of the horse gang. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall sensed something, and his sharp eyes noticed a faint black shadow on the other side of the raging firewall, but he did not see the specific situation at that time. But he saw that the leader of the horse gang was seriously injured and then was forcibly taken away by several cavalrymen. He also saw that the horse gang was in chaos and the signs of collapse at this time. They did not rush down the meadow to rescue people in the camp before, because the 200 or 300 fierce horse gang were well guarded and good at fighting. The commander did not want to risk the noble lives of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. But now the leader of the horse gang was dead, and the collapse was inevitable. It was a good chance for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall to show their strength and collect military achievements. As a leader who was good at fighting, he certainly would not miss this opportunity. The horse gang is killing the followers of Hao Yin. As the papal guardians of Divine Hall, you know what to do. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall drew out the sword at his waist, pointed at the chaotic camp of the grain team below the meadow, and said in a low voice. The sun shone on his serious and righteous face, which looked extremely holy. For the light, go forward. 100 cavalrymen of Divine Hall moved according to the order. They held the weapons engraved with talismans in their hands, lifted the reins, and whipped the horses. They rushed from a meadow to the camp at a high speed, kicking up a lot of gravel. The black armors were painted with complicated golden patterns, which looked like countless blooming sunflowers in the sun, shining. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall began their rescue operation with the spirit of justice and fearlessness. Facing the papal guardians, who were the most elite cavalrymen in the world, the horse gang was exhausted after fighting for half a day. And because their leader was seriously injured and escaped, they fell into panic and confusion. They had no ability to resist and were defeated again and again. Even the fiercest and most powerful horse gang was no match for the ordinary cavalrymen of Divine Hall, not to mention that the machetes in their hands were as vulnerable as branches and wooden sticks in front of the talisman soldiers of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. It did not take long for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall to defeat all the horse gang around the camp. They only paid a small price, and the commander's idea and plan were perfectly realized. The light won again. The 600 horse gang suffered heavy casualties, and the remaining horse gang scattered. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall had to clean up the battlefield, collect the heads, and protect the nobles above the meadow. They only chased the horse gang symbolically. So the horse gang, who had been fighting with the 200 cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom, also took the opportunity to escape. The fight in the meadow was fierce, and so were the 200 cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom and the horse gang. At this time, there were only about 40 cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom who could ride back to the camp, and everyone was wounded. The battle started in the morning, and people kept dying. But relying on the formation of carriages and the bravery of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, not many people died. The most serious casualties appear at the end. The broken formation of carriages and Mo Shanshan, whose psyche power was exhausted, could no longer protect more people. Countless soldiers and civilians of Yin Kingdom were killed by the machetes of the horse gang. A young male disciple of Black Ink Garden was attacked by his several red-eyed horse gang and died tragically. Zhuozhihua and other girls of the Great River Kingdom stood in front of the dead body of their junior brother. Their eyes were full of sadness and anger. Cat Girl, the youngest among them, could not help crying, and her eyes were red. There was a sad atmosphere in the camp, and dense hoofbeats sounded outside the camp. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall finished the short-distance chase of the Scatter Horse Gang and regrouped. Their black armor with golden flower patterns shone dazzlingly in the sun. The neat formation looked strict, and the light was full of pressure. In normal times, the soldiers and civilians of the Yin Kingdom who believed in Haotian Taoism in the camp would look at them with admiration or even kneel on the ground and kowtow devoutly out of absolute awe of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, at this moment, the people who were shrouded in sadness did not pay attention to the cavalrymen of Divine Hall outside the camp. Occasionally, some people looked over, and their eyes were so cold and numb, even with a hint of hatred. If these cavalrymen of Divine Hall had not waited on the meadow, and had chosen to rush to the camp at the first time, and cooperated with the disciples of Black Ink Garden, especially the powerful female talisman master, they could definitely defeat the horse gang. However, they did not do so, and directly led to the camp suffering heavy casualties at the last moment. At this time, many cold bodies lying on the ground of the wilderness should still be warm. Many dead people could have survived and returned to the Yin Kingdom to see their relatives. However, because of the selfishness and coldness of these cavalrymen of Divine Hall, all the possibilities did not exist. In this case, no one in the camp would welcome the arrival of this group of cavalrymen of Divine Hall. People could never see the back of their heads, and light could never see its own darkness, especially when you thought you were very high and when you thought you were absolutely bright. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall lined up outside the camp did not think that there was anything wrong with their previous action of not moving. At that time, the horse gang still had enough fighting power. Did they want the noble cavalrymen of Divine Hall to risk their lives and bleed for the common people? On the contrary, in their view, it was still the cavalrymen of Divine Hall who finally defeated the horse gang and saved the lives of the people in the camp. They deserved to be appreciated and grateful, instead of the cold, indifferent, and even hateful eyes now. Some cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not help showing a trace of contempt and anger on their indifferent and serious faces. If the commander had given the order, they might even have rushed into the camp, dragged out the few civilians who dared to cast hateful eyes on them, and severely whipped them. Looking at the indifferent faces of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall outside the camp, and thinking of their previous cold-blooded shamelessness and their current disgusting expressions, Catgirl was so angry that her face turned red. She raised her arm to wipe her tears and was about to rush out to scold them. Zhuozhihua pulled her behind her and forcibly suppressed the sadness and anger in her heart. She bowed to the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, who sat high on the horse without saying anything, and began to deal with the funeral affairs in the camp with her junior sisters. The so-called funeral affairs were all sad things. The soldiers of Yin Kingdom, who were covered with wounds, supported each other, looking at the corpses of their companions lying everywhere, and the broken limbs and pools of blood. They could not feel the lucky joy of surviving a disaster. Many people began to wail loudly, and the cries in the camp shook the sky. There is another chapter of 5,000. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 223. Listening to the continuous crying in the camp, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. He could understand the indifference of the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, but he did not care about their indifference. Instead, he was a little disdainful and sarcastic. Ignoring them, he raised his right hand and signaled his subordinates to start cleaning the battlefield. The cold and gorgeous sword edge pierced into the neck of the horse gang and cut off the head with a twist and a cut. Regardless of whether the dead horse gang's eyes were open or closed, the commander threw the head into the big bag. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall began to harvest the heads of the horse gang. Although many horse gangs outside the camp died in the first counterattack in the morning, died in the talisman fire, and died in the desperate resistance of the grain team, at this moment, No one would compete with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall for military merits. People in the camp were busy treating the seriously injured, moving the corpses, cleaning up the losses, saving the few remaining provisions, and dispelling the sadness and anger in their hearts. With the broken and scorched cart formation as the dividing line, the inside and outside of the camp were naturally divided into two worlds. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the ruined camp and the obvious traces of the battle. He imagined the charge of the horse gang and the fierce battle the camp had withstood before the arrival of the reinforcements, and could not help but feel a little admiration. His eyes fell on the wreckage of the carriage in the center of the camp, and his pupils slightly shrank. He did not find the figure of the young talisman master, nor the black shadow. After a moment of silence, he lightly kicked the horse's abdomen and urged the horse to pass through a gap in the cart formation. He came to the back of the disciples of Black Ink Garden who were busy treating the injured and asked, "Who is in charge here?" Zhuojihua forcefully tied a piece of cloth to the bleeding wound of a civilian's broken arm and gently lifted the hair coagulated by the blood in front of her forehead. She turned to look at the commander on the horse, but did not answer him. A disciple of Black Ink Garden heard the question and subconsciously looked back at a carriage in the camp. Catgirl suddenly thought of what Ning Kei had told her before. She handed the medicine in her hand to a senior sister next to her and trotted out of the camp. In addition to the mules and horses, there were 3 carriages in the grain delivery team. Among them, the carriage where the young talisman master was in had been shattered into pieces by the power of the half-divine talisman, while the other 2 carriages were intact. The big black horse was waiting outside one of the carriages, kicking its hooves in boredom. The interior of the carriage was dim. Only when the winter wind of the wilderness lifted a corner of the curtain did the interior become a little brighter. There was a parcel lying quietly on the board of the carriage. Judging from the sunken surface of the board, the parcel was obviously not as heavy as it was. Ninkei reached out to wipe off the blood oozing out of his mouth and nose. He then reached into the basin beside him and washed it with clean water. Then, he took a small copper box and opened it. Looking at the shabby things in the box, he could not help but shake his head. "You're a girl. Why do you only have so little makeup?" "It's not mine, it's theirs." Mo Shan, who was sitting on the opposite side, looked at Ning Kei attentively. It seemed that only by concentrating could she make her unfocused and indifferent eyes fall on his face. At this time, there was some doubt in her eyes. "As far as I know, girls in the Great River Kingdom attach great importance to makeup. Last year, there was a popular eyebrow-raising makeup in Chang'an City. I heard that it was spread from your country. Why don't you people care about it?" Ninkei lowered his head to grind the powder. His movements seemed very skillful and experienced. "Cultivators don't need to care about makeup." Mo Shan looked at him quietly. Seeing that he didn't want to discuss this issue, her black and beautiful eyebrows slowly furrowed. She asked, "Why do you need makeup?" Ninkei raised his head and reached out to lift the hair in front of her forehead. His fingers moved casually and combed the waterfall-like black hair in his shape. Then, he picked up a very delicate wooden hairpin beside him and pinned it. "Because we need you to be very energetic now." He concentrated on picking the thickness of the rouge and casually explained, "The guys in the Divine Hall are all psychopaths. Although they're shameless, they won't go crazy at any time and place. But no one knows whether they will do something crazier to prevent their shamelessness from being spread." Ninkei picked up a touch of rouge with his fingernail, thinned it, and then dipped it into a pure white cotton handkerchief specially found. He motioned the young talisman master to raise her face and said, "The only thing we can use to deter them now is you. So, you have to be energetic and can't be as weak as you are now. It seems that you will die at any time." "What's the relationship between the two?" Mo Shan asked seriously. "Although you are known as the calligraphy addict and can deter those cavalrymen of Divine Hall, if you are too weak, it is easy to stimulate the madness of some psychopaths. Once they go crazy, they will not care whether you are one of the 3 addicts or the last disciple of the master of calligrapher Wang. I know this psychological factor is difficult to explain. You only need to know that many life and death fights in the world are often just because someone glanced at someone. Ninkei guessed the real identity of Emo Shanshan from the shore of the Blue Lake in winter to the blood-soaked battle with her in the wilderness. It was also the first time that he made it clear in his words. There was only one young talisman master in the world who could draw half-divine talisman, because there was only one calligraphy addict in the world. Emo Shanshan had been apprenticed to the master of calligrapher in Mogan Mountain since she was a child. She had been obsessed with calligraphy and talisman for more than 10 years and did not have much experience in the secular world. Facing Ninkei, who had been killing people to survive since he was a child, she naturally felt that she could learn a lot. No one knew whether she understood Ninkei's words or not. Anyway, she obediently raised her face. Her face was very small with slightly puffed cheeks and picturesque eyebrows. Although she was pale and haggard at the moment, she was still beautiful. Ninkei held the small square handkerchief dipped in rouge and looked at the small face close to him. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled. 2 years ago, he was still killing horse gang, gambling, drinking, and bullying Sang Sang in the city of Wei. He never thought that one day he would be in the same carriage with a calligraphy addict, one of the 3 addicts in the world, and that she would be so obedient and let him do whatever he wanted. He rubbed the rouge on her face with his fingers, and it gradually dispersed. It was neither heavy nor light makeup. Emo Shanshan's pale face gradually became ruddy under his fingers. It felt good to rub the girl's face with his fingers, especially her slightly puffed cheeks, which were soft and tender. Emo Shanshan sat quietly with her head slightly lowered, letting him rub on her face with her eyelashes slightly trembling. Soon the makeup was finished. The girl's pale and haggard face looked fresh and beautiful, and the blush looked very real. Ninkei wondered when his craftsmanship had become so good. Then he was going to draw her eyebrows, but he noticed that her eyebrows were thin and black, just as beautiful as the painting. After thinking for a moment, he finally put down the charcoal pen gently. "Do you often do these things?" Emo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked. Ninkei thought of his home life after he entered Chang and city and became a rich man. He thought of the large pile of rouge and powder of Chinjinji Cosmetics store hidden on the bed in the old brushpen shop. He smiled gently and said, "I have a little girl at home, so I do these things a lot." Emo Shanshan's long and sparse eyelashes blinked, and she did not continue to ask anything. She turned around and lifted the curtain to look outside. Her cheeks that had just become ruddy became paler again. People in the camp were carrying the bodies of the dead and collecting wood. It seemed that they were going to cremate the dead. At the periphery of the camp, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had almost finished harvesting the heads of the horse gang. The black and gold pattern armor of light was stained with blood, and the sacks were bulging with numerous heads. The Central Plains Coalition Army entered the wilderness to assist Yin Kingdom under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Except for the Tang army on the western battlefront, the eastern battlefront was determined by the heads. Today, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had harvested at least more than 300 heads, which was naturally a great achievement. Logically speaking, this achievement should mainly belong to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden and the soldiers and civilians of the Yin Kingdom. However, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall unscrupulously snatched the achievement. Although Emo Shanshan did not care about it, she could clearly feel that the people in the camp who were silently preparing for the cremation were becoming more and more sad and angry. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the young talisman master who lifted the curtain and noticed that she was in good spirits. He could not help but secretly shiver, thinking that this girl had just taken a great risk to forcibly use the divine talisman across the state. He did not expect that she could recover in such a short time. She really deserved to be one of the 3 addicts in the world who were as famous as the priest. It turns out that Hill Master is in charge here. I didn't know it before, so the rescue came late. Please forgive me, Hill Master. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked calm. In one sentence, he forgot that he did not take any action and coldly watched the camp being attacked. He bowed with hands folded in front to show rare respect to the calligraphy addict Emo Shanshan, and then said, "Miss is in the carriage on the meadow now. She asked me to invite Hill Master to meet her." The papal guardians of the Western Church were directly managed by the judicial department. If the miss he mentioned was not the Tao addict Yihong Yu, it must be the flower addict. Mo Shanshan was very clear about this, and she knew that the flower addict was above the meadow. The Black Ink Garden is ordered by the Divine Hall to escort the provisions into the palace. It is our duty, and we dare not to leave. Mo Shanshan looked at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and said. The commander smiled slightly and said, Miss and Hill Master have not seen each other for several years. She hopes to see you again. These words were said peacefully with affection, but indifferently revealed a hint of toughness. Mo Shanshan looked at him expressionlessly and said, If she really wanted to see me, she could have come down from the meadow to see me. Since she did not see me before, there is no need to see me now. These words were said calmly with a hint of sarcasm, but did not conceal the toughness. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked slightly gloomy and silently looked at her sitting in front of the carriage. No one knew what he was thinking about. Finally, he lifted the reins and left without saying a word. Outside the camp, a cavalryman of Divine Hall held 2 padeos and walked to the front of his horse. The commander looked at the complicated lines carved on the 2 padeos. Although he could not understand the meaning for a while, as a strong man in the see-through realm, he instinctively felt the hidden beauty and realm. His eyes brightened. Just when he was about to take the 2 padeos as trophies and study them in the future, a clear and angry voice sounded not far away. Those are ours. Catgirl angrily stared at the commander on the horse. Her face was covered with fine beads of sweat, and her body was covered with dust and bloodstains. It seemed that she had been looking for the 2 padeos outside the camp for a long time. The commander smiled faintly and lifted the reins lightly to leave. He did not care about her at all. Catgirl trotted quickly and rushed to the front of his horse like a gust of wind. Holding the ebony handle of her sword, she stared at him and refused to give way. She did not hide the hatred in her clear eyes. Several cavalrymen of Divine Hall unceremoniously stepped forward and tried to push her away. With a clear sound, Catgirl unsheathed her sword. Looking at several cavalrymen of Divine Hall who were much taller than her, she showed no fear and said with a slightly trembling voice, You have cut off the heads of the horse gang. Do you still want to rob our weapons? The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at her coldly and said, The disciples of Black Ink Garden use either talismans or swords. When did you start to use knives? Zhuozhihua and other disciples of Black Ink Garden saw the conflict here and rushed over. When they found that their petite junior sister was surrounded by these shameless cavalrymen of Divine Hall, they could not help bursting out their long-suppressed anger. The sound of the sword rubbing against the scabbard rang out, and they confronted the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. The atmosphere in the field suddenly became extremely tense. Although hundreds of elite cavalrymen of Divine Hall took the lead, the number of Black Ink Garden disciples was very small, and they were all exhausted. However, with their perseverance, they did not retreat even half a step. A winter wind blew in the meadow. Mo Shanshan walked over slowly with her white dress fluttering in the wind. She looked indifferent and indifferent. She looked at the impatient cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the commander on the horse and said indifferently, Our disciples of Black Ink Garden can use knives whenever they want. Do we also need to explain to the Divine Hall about this kind of thing? The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at her silently and suddenly said, Hill Master's words seem a little unreasonable. Mo Shanshan said, Do you mean that the Divine Hall now also think that thieves are reasonable? The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly changed his expression and felt humiliated. He looked at her and those disciples of Black Ink Garden who were holding swords in front of the horse and said coldly, How dare you compare the Divine Hall with thieves? So disrespectful. Do you want the judicial department to ask the sage of calligrapher how he teaches his disciple? Mo Shanshan calmly replied, I will wait for the great divine priest of judgment's words on behalf of my teacher. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall clearly guessed that the calligraphy addict should be forcing herself to be spirited at this time, but he did not dare to offend her at will. He stared at the young talisman master's eyes and suddenly said, Hill Master has been ordered by the Divine Hall to transport provisions into the palace. This matter is related to the peace negotiation between the two sides. Now the provisions have been destroyed. I don't know how you will explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army. If the peace negotiation between the two sides is broken because of this, I don't know whether you can bear the responsibility. How to explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army is my business. It has nothing to do with you. Mo Shanshan slightly blinked her eyelashes and softly said, "Even if I don't explain, you can't kill me here." She raised her head and quietly looked at the eyes of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, saying, "Or kill all the people here." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the hair that was blown to her cheeks by the wind to the back of her shoulders and calmly said, "Since you won't kill all of us, then what are you still doing here? Put down the padeos and go." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was silent for a long time. He casually threw the two padeos on the saddle to the ground and looked at her with a slight smile, saying, "I hope to see Hill master again in the palace." Catgirl sheathed her sword and pushed away the cavalrymen of Divine Hall in front of her. She rushed to the commander's horse and picked up the two padeos. She tightly held them in her arms like treasures and stared at him vigilantly. Mo Shanshan did not respond to the invitation or threat of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. She directly turned around and walked back to the camp. In the wilderness in the deep winter, the sun appeared along the low southern sky and soon disappeared. The battle started in the early morning. When the battlefield was cleaned up, it was almost dusk and the light became dim. The dense sound of horse hooves above the meadow sounded like thunder and then gradually became lower. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted Aunt Cunimati of Uelon Kingdom, the girl in the carriage, and people from the Revelation Institute and the White Tower Temple. The blood-like dusk shrouded the camp, making the bloodstains on the ground and carriage boards even more dazzling. Broken carriage boards, carriage fragments, and hay were piled up together and seemed to be burning in the sunset. After a while, these things were really ignited. The fire became bigger in an instant with the help of the wind in the wilderness and gradually swallowed the bodies of the victims piled up on it. In the crackling sound, one could vaguely see the melted, scorched, and deformed bodies, which made people feel extremely confused and complicated. The air began to fill with a terrible and disgusting burnt smell. The survivors around the cremation ground lowered their heads and began to chant the reincarnation order from the Haotian Taoism song in unison. The monotonous syllables kept repeating, praying that the souls in the flame could smoothly return to the embrace of Haotian. The somewhat messy voice at first became more and more orderly, low, and full of compassion. Nengke did not get off the carriage because he was seriously injured. He lifted the curtain and silently looked at the flame in the distance, listening to the chanting and prayers of the people. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the high and distant sky above his head. The sky in the wilderness was as clean as he was familiar with. But at this time, under the light of the sunset, it naturally divided into two different worlds. The near-night side was as blue as the sea, while the near-day side was burning like fire. He could not explain why he came to this world. In his childhood in Chong, and he had been exposed to the faith of Haotian. His master, Master Yensei, was a minister of offerings in the South School of Haotian and a great divine priest with a seat in the West Hill Divine Palace. So he naturally believed in Haotian like most people in the world. However, at this moment, in front of the countless souls in the flame, under the sea and fiery sky, his view of the world was gradually changing uncontrollably. People set up camp again in the meadow and spent a long and cold night. The next morning, dozens of surviving cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom returned to the south with the wounded. They were the direct descendants of Crown Prince Chongming and knew very well why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had such an attitude when they were attacked yesterday. They also knew that even if they went to the palace, they would not get any justice at all, and even had a great risk of being punished by the Divine Hall. So naturally, they chose to return. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom did not go south with the cavalrymen of Yin Kingdom. Instead, they took 2 carriages and several horses and set off again, heading northeast to the Left Tent Palace. Looking at the desolate scenery and the remaining snow in the sparse grass outside the window, Ningke coughed twice and took out the handkerchief prepared by Sang Sang. He wiped the blood on the corner of his mouth and turned to look at the girl in white opposite him. He asked, Why do you want to go to the palace? The matter of the grain team needs an explanation, and Imo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyelashes and trembled slightly. After a long silence, she said, I am very angry. Ninkei looked at her and smiled. He said, I find that I kind of like you. The task was completed on Thursday. I almost vomited from writing so much. There's still 3 days left. Oh my God, my dear ones, if you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 2:24. Hearing this, the young talisman master lowered her head and looked at the white dress on her knees. It seemed that the lace there was very beautiful, but in fact, the white dress was plain with nothing on it. The horse carriage was still moving forward. The wind in the wilderness lifted the curtain, and the morning sunshine shone in. The morning sunshine shone on the plain black and white decoration in the carriage, and on her black hair and white face, separating out a few wisps of light and shadow. A calm and affirmative voice slowly came from her lips. I think I already have someone I like. The morning sunshine also fell on Ning Quebec. He did not expect that his habitual way of speaking would cause the other party to misunderstand. He smiled awkwardly, and his smile looked very gentle in the morning sunshine. I have a lot of people I like. Like is a common phrase that I use to express my kindness. I hope it won't make you feel too abrupt. The wilderness ground was blown dry and hard by the cold wind, and the wheels on it shook from time to time. The horse carriage was not big, and the two sat opposite each other. With the rise and fall of the carriage, their knees almost touched each other. Ninkei moved back and leaned against the cotton cushion by the window. His sore body finally found a support point, and he could not help but let out a comfortable sigh. Looking at the beautiful face of the young girl close at hand, he said, This is what the world is like. You don't need to be unhappy about those disgusting things. Yesterday, he helped Imo Shanshan make up and tied her waterfall-like black hair at the back. When she woke up this morning, Imo Shanshan still maintained this hairstyle. He did not know whether she did not care about it, or she thought Ning Kei's craftsmanship was really good. So when she habitually combed the hair in front of her forehead, her slender fingers missed. She very seriously asked, Joy and hate are all emotions. How can you suppress them? Ning Kei leaned against the window, and his eyes were slightly squinted by the dazzling morning sunshine from the corner of the curtain. After a moment of silence, he said, I don't mean to suppress this kind of emotion, but to not be affected by this kind of emotion. Being angry is to punish yourself with other people's mistakes. It is not worthwhile. Imo Shanshan slowly frowned and persistently asked, But being angry is being angry. Looking at her eyebrows, Ning Kei suddenly had an impulse to touch them with his fingers. He withdrew his hands into his sleeves and said, Since you are angry, of course you should vent your anger as soon as possible. So I support you to go to the palace. But have you thought clearly, once you meet the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, or those nobles in the palace, what should you do? Imo Shanshan shook her head expressionlessly. She just intuitively thought that she should go to the palace to find the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and those people on the meadow and seek justice for the dead Yin Kingdom soldiers and soldiers. Ninkei seemed to have guessed what she was thinking. He looked at her and said seriously, There is no such thing as justice. Even if you are powerful enough, you may not be able to get it back. So venting your anger has nothing to do with justice, but fairness. King Yin, Manu, if others hit us, we will hit them. If others curse us, we will hit them. If others want to kill us, we will kill them first. Imo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him. It seemed that she did not expect that many things from his mouth would become so simple and presumptuous. She slightly frowned and asked, You, Tangs, do you all see things like this? Almost. Ning Kei said with a smile, We have been receiving this kind of education since we were born. Imo Shanshan reached out to lift the curtain of the window beside her. She looked at the desolate scenery of the wilderness gradually retreating, looked at the few lonely birds in the distant sky, and thought of the people in the horse carriage on the meadow yesterday. After a moment of silence, she said, What if I can't kill those people when I arrive at the palace? Naturally, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the nobles they protected could not be killed easily, even if she was the well-known calligraphy addict. Ninkei looked at her confused expression and vaguely guessed that those people on the meadow might be of extremely high status. Who were those people on the meadow yesterday? Mo Shanshan turned her head and looked at him. She softly said, the students of the Revelation Institute and the monks of the White Tower Temple. If you want to ask the person in the horse carriage, she is the princess of the Ueloan Kingdom and also the favorite of the Revelation Institute. Ninkei's frown gradually relaxed. The change in his expression did not mean that he was relaxed. Instead, it showed that he was a little surprised. He said, the flower addict Lu Chenjia? What is the legendary wonderful person doing in the wilderness? Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly smiled. Her originally stiff expression suddenly became lively because of this rare smile. Especially the undisciplined and cold gaze in her eyes, it actually became a bit cuter in an instant. You don't know that Mo Shanshan is the calligraphy addict, but you know the name of the flower addict. Ninkei smiled. He thought that if it was the flower addict, it would be wishful thinking for them to go to the palace to seek justice. After his smile gradually faded, he looked at Mo Shanshan and said, you can't kill people, but you want to vent your anger. Perhaps I can give you some ideas. What does the flower addict Lu Chenjia like or value the most? She's called the flower addict. Her favorite and most cherished thing is naturally flowers. Mo Shanshan looked at Ninkei's face as if she was looking at an idiot. She said, other than that, everyone knows that she is crazy about Prince Longqing. In fact, she is a very virtuous person. Ninkei thought for a moment and said, venting anger is nothing more than bullying people. If you want to go to the palace to vent your anger, then you can directly start with flowers and virtuousness. Then, he began to seriously plan for Mo Shanshan. Once they met Lu Chenjia in the palace, what kind of method should be used to appease the anger of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, and how to avoid causing too much of a commotion? Mo Shanshan's brows furrowed slightly as she listened to these seemingly childish, yet sinister ideas when she thought about it carefully. She looked at Ninkei's smiling face under the morning light. She looked at his fresh little dimples and suddenly felt that his smile was so hateful and so cute at the same time. Bullying people was Ninkei's favorite thing to do. Bullying the strong as the weak was something he loved more than making love. He thought to himself that he had already bullied Prince Longqing once in advance. He did not know what the flower addict would think of him if she knew. Just as he was thinking excitedly, he suddenly realized that Mo Shanshan was looking at him attentively from the corner of his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had gotten carried away and could not help but smile awkwardly. Ninkei asked, are you very familiar with the flower addict? At this time, Mo Shanshan was grinding ink and laying paper. In order to keep a distance from Ninkei, she leaned as far as possible towards the window. She answered, she once went to Mogan Mountain a few years ago. I spent dozens of days with her. Ninkei leaned against the carriage and looked up at the plain decorations in the carriage. He raised his eyebrows and asked, what kind of person is the flower addict? Is she very beautiful? Is she really as crazy about flowers as the rumors say? Mo Shanshan's right hand holding the pen slightly paused. She turned back to look at him and said, are you very interested in her? Ninkei said with a smile, I'm really curious about what Prince Longqing's fiancée looks like, because I've always been curious. Is there any woman in this world who doesn't feel inferior when facing Prince Longqing's perfect face? Mo Shanshan gently put the pen on the shelf and turned around with her hand on ground. She slightly tilted her head to look at him and asked, have you seen Prince Longqing? Even if I haven't seen him, I've heard of him. Everyone knows that His Highness is the most beautiful man in the world. After saying this, Ninkei found that the young talisman master was still staring at him. He knew that she did not believe this statement, so he had to raise his hands in surrender and said with a smile, well, I admit that I have seen him. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly. No one knew what she was thinking about. Her eyes, which were as calm as the autumn lake, suddenly became bright for a moment. Her lips slightly moved as if she wanted to ask something, but in the end, she did not ask. She seemed to be a little flustered. Perhaps to cover up the previous moment of panic, she slightly bowed her head and slightly blinked her eyelashes. She sat down again with her hands on her knees and said another thing. You once analyzed that the target of those horse gangs should be me instead of the provisions. But in fact, their target should be you. She raised her head and looked at Ning Ke, as if she was looking at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window behind Ning Quebec. She seriously said, I clearly saw the scene behind the wall of fire. They came prepared and just wanted to kill you. Ning Ke did not ask the question that he did not ask. He knew that she had long suspected his identity, but she did not ask directly, which made him feel a little grateful. But at this time, he was still hesitating when to tell the girls of the Great River Kingdom about his true identity and did not know how to answer. Speaking of the firewall and the battle yesterday, he remembered the horrible hole that the half-divine talisman hit on the wall of fire. He said, at that time, I thought that was the last sky-burning fire talisman you could display. After that, your psyche power was exhausted and you could not even display the simplest talisman Taoism. I did not expect that you still had such a trick. Mo Shanshan suddenly leaned forward and very seriously bowed to him. She softly said, Senior brother, I have to thank you for teaching me how to fight the day before yesterday. Shanshan thanks you here. Ning Ke was startled. He remembered that he had severely reprimanded her a few days ago, saying that she was soft-hearted and that she did not know how to fight at all and did not know to save the most powerful power for the most critical moment. At that time, he did not completely guess her identity. At this time, thinking that he was actually teaching the calligraphy addict how to fight, he could not help but feel a little emotional. In any case, we could survive because of your half-divine talisman. At that time, he was in a critical situation and did not have a clear feeling about the earth-shattering divine talisman. But after thinking about it carefully last night, he increasingly felt that the girl talisman master opposite him was amazing. It was not a big deal to challenge someone in the 5 states of cultivation. As Chun Pippi said, with his cultivation aptitude, even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would be the weakest one in the history. If there was no other means, any powerhouse in the see-through state could try to challenge or even kill him. But states were states. Mo Shanshan was obviously still in the see-through state, but she could display the infinitive talisman that only divine talisman masters could display. This fact deeply shocked and puzzled Ning Quebec Master Yen Se concluded that he was a rare genius in talisman Taoism in the world. However, looking at the girl in white who was quietly sitting on her knees in front of him and her beautiful face, which was neither angry nor happy, Ning Ke rarely had a lack of confidence. Master, did you choose me because you already knew that the most talented successor of talisman Taoism in the world was taken away by the master of calligrapher? But in this way, I feel very embarrassed. Of course, Mo Shanshan could not guess Ning Ke's psychological activities at this time, and she did not know that he was silently criticizing a respected divine talisman master and feeling sorry for himself. She put her hands together and bowed, asking seriously, Senior brother Zhong. Ning Ke woke up and corrected her seriously. I said, you can call me 13. Mo Shanshan was stunned and felt that this title was a little awkward. After hesitating for a moment, she said bitterly, 13. Senior brother, I want to ask you something. Seeing her serious and solemn, Ning Ke did not know what she wanted to say. He calmed himself down and saluted back, saying, please go ahead. Mo Shanshan said, I have been cultivating talisman Taoism with my master since I was a child. I have been in contact with books and talismans for more than 10 years. I want to ask you to teach me how to fight with me and how to win. Looking at her serious expression, Ning Ke knew that yesterday's battle must have impacted this young talisman master's view of the world. She had been famous for a long time, so she made this request. In terms of cultivation state, he knew that he was mediocre. Compared with his senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain, Prince Longqing and the young talisman master opposite him, he was not worth mentioning at all. But when it came to fighting, he had been struggling between life and death since he was a child, dancing on the edge of the blade. His whole life was continuous fighting, so he was extremely confident. Fighting is a very simple thing. It is how to make the opponent lose the ability to hurt you under the premise of protecting yourself. So we must first know what kind of strength we have and what kind of strength the enemy has. Ning Ke pointed at the carriage roof above their heads and said, We must first know how high the roof is from the floor to the roof, and then know how high we are. Only then can we know whether we will hit our head when we stand up. Of course, we may break the roof of the carriage, but I think not many people are willing to use their head to measure the hardness of the roof. It was a very simple language and a very shallow metaphor, but it could be described more clearly than the preparation work before a fight. When Mo Shanshan was thinking, her eyes became more unfocused and indifferent, and no one knew where she was looking. She murmured softly, "How to judge that the opponent has lost the ability to hurt himself?" Ninkei liked to answer this seemingly stupid but actually very important question. He leaned against the cotton cushion beside the window, raised his hand in the air and answered, "Breaking the arms or legs is the most common way to seriously injure someone. But if you need to make sure that the opponent has lost all the fighting power, remember one sentence: only the dead are safe." Hearing this, Mo Shanshan looked a little confused, as if she didn't understand why Ninkei always put death at the forefront when it came to fighting. She had been taught by Mr. Mo Chi since she was a child that the fight between cultivators didn't necessarily have to be about life and death. Ninkei looked at her expression and realized that this calligraphy addict was really a pure, white lotus flower born in the ink lake. Before coming to the wilderness, she didn't know the sufferings of the world at all. He couldn't help saying earnestly, "If you cultivate in the ink lake, of course you don't need to think about these problems. Just like me, if I hide in the academy to study, I only need to play chess, forge iron, and listen to music every day. I don't know how happy my life would be. But the world outside the small building is full of wind, frost, snow, and rain. Since you have stepped into it, you have to understand how dangerous it is." Mo Shanshan heard his sincere words and nodded to show that she was enlightened. At the same time, she looked at him gratefully. Unfortunately, her eyes were still so unfocused that Ninkei couldn't feel her gratitude clearly. 13th brother, if the opponent's strength and state are far beyond yours, how can you defeat him? He'll master. 13th brother, you can call me by my name. If the ordinary people in the world know this, they will inevitably think that I am too disrespectful. Then please call me younger sister Shanshan. Younger sister Shanshan, the question you asked just now is basically unsolvable. If anyone can answer this question perfectly, then he will be the most powerful person in the world, because he has ways to defeat those who are more powerful than him. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly. After a long time of silence, she asked seriously, "Senior brother, are you being sarcastic?" Ninkei looked at her blankly. From the side of the blue lake, he found a fact that made him feel a little uncomfortable. Finally, there was someone in the world who could defeat him countless times. Younger sister, you can think of it as sarcasm, but please don't think too much about it. The sarcasm in my speech is often to deepen the impression of the listener, because this matter is very important. Mo Shanshan nodded and continued to ask, "Then how can we defeat enemies who are far more powerful than us?" Ninkei answered seriously, "When facing enemies who are far more powerful than us, I insist that we only have one choice." Mo Shanshan raised her small face slightly and asked with expectation, "What choice?" Ninkei said, "Escape. Don't be speechless. Escape is also a kind of battle. When facing opponents who are far more powerful than us, even if you want to escape, you may not succeed. If you want, I can start teaching you from the beginning of escape. Senior brother, it is indeed a very good character to think about failure before talking about victory. But I still want to learn how to win first." Mo Shanshan sat on a small table by the window, holding an ink brush in her hand, ready to take notes carefully. Ninkei looked at this scene and could not help but feel a little proud. He could not help but think of last spring, when he was on the horse carriage returning from the wilderness. He used to take down every word of old Master Liu with an ink brush on a piece of paper, just like her. He felt a lot of complicated emotions, and after calming down a little, he said seriously, "You are right. Among the younger generation in the world, there are not many people who can surpass you in cultivation state. I believe that in most cases, the opponents you face, like the horse gang yesterday, are far weaker than you." He said seriously, "When facing an opponent who is weaker than you can't have sympathy, can't have arrogance, and can't see the opponent as a weak person. Instead, you have to treat the opponent as the most powerful enemy. But you must remember that you can't look down on the opponent in terms of fighting spirit, and you should have a choice in tactics. When facing a strong opponent who is weak, it is like a fierce tiger pouncing on a rabbit. A fierce tiger's full strength does not really transfer all its strength to its palms and then kill the weak rabbit. Instead, it focuses on the mind and does not give the weak rabbit any chance to escape. Pouncing on the rabbit and killing it avoids the tiredness of chasing, entanglement, and can save energy. If the tiger appears, even hundreds of rabbits will not dare to move. Mo Shanshan remembered these words, raised her head, looked at him, and asked, "What if two tigers meet?" Ninkei said, "Pretend to be injured and beg for mercy, saying that I have silently loved you for 10,000 years, and do everything possible to weaken your opponent's will, like beating his mother, killing his family, and slapping his son, and do everything possible to provoke him and make him lose his mind. If you wear shoes, go to the thorny land. If you wear thick clothes, choose the bitter cold land, and do everything possible to create a suitable fighting background for you. If the opponent is strong, you will fight with the tip of your claws and cut his skin to make him bleed. If the opponent's claws are strong, you will wait quietly and let him injure you slightly. Then you will find an opportunity to enter a desperate situation and do everything possible to hide your weakness and take the lead." Mo Shanshan listened to him talking about all kinds of situations, and her eyes became more and more unfocused. She subconsciously muttered to herself, "It sounds very troublesome. Where can I find so many ways? If all the methods don't work, then you only need to remember the last one." Ninkei looked at her and said seriously, "When two tigers meet, the brave one wins." Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him seriously. After a long time of silence, she completely understood the meaning of these words and said softly with emotion, "Senior brother, you really know a lot of things." Ninkei always felt that her focused eyes seemed to be focused on something else. Hearing this praise, he could not help but feel a little strange and said, "Younger sister, you have countless admirers in the world, and I can't stand being praised by you so often." Mo Shanshan frowned and asked confusedly, "Senior brother, why do you know so many things?" Ninkei adjusted his sitting posture and said with a smile, "The master of the academy once taught us that true knowledge comes from practice. Younger sister, if you have been fighting since you were a child like me, then you would naturally know so many things." Mo Shanshan's expression became more and more dull. "Senior brother, you have fought so many battles. Were you very naughty when you were a child?" Ninkei's body was slightly stiff, and he felt that it was really hard to talk to this white lotus of black ink garden. Mo Shanshan asked, "Senior brother?" Ninkei waved his hand tiredly and said, "Younger sister, I also have a question to ask you." Mo Shanshan asked, "What is it?" Ninkei looked at her eyes and asked, "Why do you never look me in the eye?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked confusedly, "When did I?" Ninkei felt that she was looking at the wilderness outside the window and sighed, "Anytime and anywhere, such as now." Mo Shanshan suddenly thought of something, and her expression became slightly stiff. After a moment of silence, she explained softly, "I have loved calligraphy since childhood, and I have copied too many calligraphy sections, so my eyes are not very good." Ninkei slightly opened his mouth and did not know what to say. Only then did he know that the world-famous calligraphy addict turned out to be short-sighted, and from her eyes, could it be that there was some astigmatism? I gradually found that I have always had the complex of being at the bottom of a dry well, but my mind has never been clearer in this book, and my plan will not be disturbed by many things. It is said that the story and characters written by the writer will sometimes become more powerful than the writer, but it will not happen at night, because I clearly know where the powerful thing is. I love it. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 225. Ninkei and the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had been familiar with each other since they helped each other by the Blue Waste Sea and hunted together in the wilderness. After fighting side by side in the meadow, they were even more intimate. In the following days, Ning Ke stayed in the horse carriage to heal his wounds. At the same time, he reformed the Talisman Master's worldview, outlook on life, and outlook on fighting again. He seldom got off the horse carriage, and even ate and took a break in the carriage. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, they inevitably felt a little strange. They were very clear that the Hill Master's temperament seemed to be indifferent, but in fact, she was mild and gentle. But she had never been so close to a young man. Zhuo Jihua also felt it was very inappropriate. But thinking that Ning Ke was seriously injured, she felt embarrassed to let him get off the horse carriage. In fact, Ning Ke's injury recovered very quickly. He no longer coughed blood on the second night. His sense of perception, which had been severely shaken, also gradually subsided. The occasional dizziness did not appear again. Zhuo Jihua and other disciples of Black Ink Garden were not very clear about his physical condition. But Mo Shanshan saw the whole process of his recovery and inevitably felt a little puzzled. That night when Ning Ke drew his bow and killed several horse gang members, Mo Shanshan felt the fluctuation of psyche power. At that time, she guessed that Ning Ke should be a cultivator. She was not so surprised about this. The academy, which was a wonderful place, chose students to go to the wilderness alone to perform tasks, so the students were naturally extraordinary. But the horse gang leader was a psyche master who had entered the upper state of see-through. If she had not understood the half-divine talisman in Mogan Mountain in spring, she could not have hurt him. Such a powerful psyche master attacked Ning Ke with all her strength. According to common sense, even if Ning Ke could survive, his sense of perception would be seriously damaged, and it was very likely that he would become an idiot. How could he talk with confidence and fluency like now? Was Ning Ke's psyche power stronger than hers? The calligraphy addict was not good at talking with people, especially unwilling to pry into other people's privacy. So she had many doubts about Ning Ke, but she did not ask any questions. She just sat quietly by the window and used graceful small regular script to remember Ning Ke's instructions. Then she carefully chose what she could learn and try to understand it. Ning Ke couldn't help praising her calligraphy, because Mo Shanshan's calligraphy was indeed excellent. The brush strokes were round but not coquettish, soft but firm, and the strokes were faintly discernible and clear. The thickness was appropriate and fresh. At this moment, he finally understood why the female disciples of Black Ink Garden laughed so happily when he praised that the female talisman master's calligraphy obsession was similar to his own style in the camp a few days ago. The calligraphy addict was obsessed with books. The books here were the books of the world, not the books of reading and writing thousands of books. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, it was really ridiculous for an ordinary person to say that the calligraphy addict in the world was similar to his own style. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden rode on horses and took a turn at a certain ice jam. From the northeast to the northwest, they went straight to the palace. Along the way, they saw few people, mostly cold-tolerant Kashmir sheep and wasteland. The road was still difficult to travel. The carriage kept undulating and shaking. Ning Ke looked at her still wrist hanging the brush by the window, and the handwriting on the paper was not messy at all. He could not help but sigh with emotion. His reputation as a talisman Taoism genius was not so real in front of this girl. Would even his reputation as a calligraphy master be taken away? He placed the cotton pad behind the carriage and lay down comfortably. His face was very close to Mo Shanshan's white dress. He casually pulled out a piece of paper from the stack on the small table. When his eyes fell on it, he couldn't help but be slightly startled. There were some familiar words written on the paper. Young Master sang, "I'm drunk today, so I won't." When he saw the young talisman master writing quietly by the window, Ning Ke thought of third sister by the east window of the old library. He began to miss the academy in the south of Chong and city, the days in the back mountain, and those lovely fellow disciples. At this time, he suddenly saw his chicken soup calligraphy in a wilderness thousands of miles away. He began to miss the alley in the eastern city of Chong, and the days in the old brush pen shop and the dark and thin guy. Mo Shanshan noticed his strange expression. She turned her body with her hands on the ground and found that he was looking at the chicken soup calligraphy she bought with a lot of money. She could not help asking, 13th brother, Do you also know calligraphy? It must be said that the calligraphy addict was not good at communicating with people. If it was someone else who asked, they would probably say, "Senior brother, do you also like calligraphy?" But she was direct and did not think about the listener's feelings at all. Ninkei had long been used to her talking about things like second brother's ancient crown from time to time. He did not care about it at all. He shrugged and answered, "A little." Mo Shanshan once asked him if he also knew talisman Taoism. At that time, his answer was a little. Now that they talked about calligraphy, his answer was still a little. In front of others, he might have the confidence to say that he was a genius in talisman Taoism and a calligraphy master. But in front of the calligraphy addict, he felt that it was better to keep a low profile to avoid losing face. Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked, "What do you think of this calligraphy?" She looked very focused and seemed to pay attention to Ninkei's answer. Ninkei did not expect that she would ask for his opinion. He said in surprise, "You mean the chicken soup calligraphy?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, "Senior brother is a student of the Chong and Academy. Of course, you have heard of the chicken soup calligraphy. I heard that this calligraphy is a masterpiece of the Academy, so I want to hear your opinion." There is a common saying that it was always difficult to know oneself. But it was also difficult to comment on oneself, especially in the case that the listener did not know if you still wanted to praise yourself. Ninkei hid his true identity from the disciples of Black Ink Garden. Although he did not have any malice, they were so close now. Once he was exposed, it would inevitably be a little embarrassing. Therefore, he had to continue to hide it until there was no suitable opportunity. At this time, facing such a situation, it was even more embarrassing. Moreover, he did not know what the young talisman master thought of the chicken soup calligraphy and him who wrote it. If she liked to appreciate it, it would be fine. But if she hated his calligraphy, wouldn't it be very troublesome? This possibility was not small. Although there was a saying that there was no first place in literature, in fact, people like Mo Shanshan, who was good at calligraphy, would always be somewhat disapproving of other calligraphers according to the conflict that had occurred in the gatherings of poets and calligraphers in Chong. And scholars despise each other. So, is it not between calligraphers? The tip of the brush of this calligraphy is exposed but not restrained. The form is scattered and the spirit is dead without a bone. It seems to be innovative, but in fact, it is just some chicken tricks. It is evil and lacks the style of righteousness and elegance. It is not worth mentioning. He did not hesitate to belittle the chicken soup calligraphy. His expression was calm, and he had all the embarrassment and bitterness in his body. He did not dare to show any of it. This might be the so-called price. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly, as if trying to discern whether he was speaking the truth or just casually belittling her. After a long time, she asked seriously again, "Then what does senior brother think of the blooming flower calligraphy?" Ninkei looked at her and said with slight surprise, "Younger sister, you have even read the flower blooms calligraphy?" Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, "I have collected some copies of the calligrapher of the Academy, but the flower blooms calligraphy is hidden in the deep palace. Even the copies are also collected by the mansions of the princes and dukes in Chang'an. Therefore, I have only heard of its name, but not seen it." Ninkei felt slightly relaxed and replied with a smile, "I have not seen it either, so I can't comment." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and fell on the rubbing of the chicken soup calligraphy in his hand. No one knew what she was thinking. She only sighed softly and turned to continue writing her hairpin-style, small regular script. In the battle under the meadow that day, she saw the scene on the other side of the wall of fire, but did not see the fleeting fireball in front of the horse gang leader's face. If she knew that Ninkei beside her was also a person of talisman Taoism, perhaps she would think differently and behave differently at this time. Deep in the wilderness, from the northeast to the northwest, they could see the faint shadow of the mountain in the distance after a short time. Min Mountain was the most magnificent and longest mountain range in the world. It extended from the depths of the wilderness to the south of the Hebei County of the Tang Empire, near Chong and City. No one knew how many kilometers it stretched, as if it was a sword left by Hao Yin in the north of the world. In the middle of the wilderness, there was a break in the Min Mountain, which formed a natural canyon. To the west of the canyon, there was a city guarded by the elites of the Tang Empire's North Road Army. It was heavily guarded, and Min Mountain was also divided into two footholds, north and south. The vast Min Mountain where Ning Ke used to live was the southern foothold. The northern foothold of Min Mountain was deep in the wilderness and was called Zashi Mountain by the barbarians, which meant Tianqi Mountain. It meant that if you walked out of this mountain range, you would be abandoned by Haoyan. There was a fertile grassland in the east of Tianqi Mountain. The tribe of Chanyu of the left tent had lived on this grassland for generations, and the palace was there. Looking at the shadow of the mountain in the distant sky through the window, Ning Ke naturally thought of Min Mountain in the south, the North Road Army fort on the other side of the mountain, and his old buddies in the city of Wei. He had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. He had been walking in the wilderness for many days, but the mountain range was still there, as if it had never changed. Even a horse would die from looking at a mountain, not to mention such a majestic and precipitous continuous mountain range. The palace was close, but it still needed some time to arrive. As the distance was shortened, Ning Ke became more and more silent. He spent more time hiding in the horse carriage and refused to get out. Even when Catgirl called him to see the white cranes in the wetland, he did not move. Because he needed time to think about two very important issues. The horse gang who attacked them in the meadow had followed them for many days. Later, they had confirmed that the target of the horse gang was him. That meant that the power behind the horse gang had already known that he had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. Who were the minions of the horse gang, or those groups of horse gang? Who wanted to kill him? Who was the leader of the horse gang? A psyche master in the see-through state could not be a simple leader of the horse gang. Ning Ke felt the aura of a soldier in the battle, which made his heart heavier. The right arm of the leader of the horse gang was cut off by him. If he did not die in the wilderness after being rescued by his subordinates, he must need a place to be treated. Such a serious injury could not be healed by the common horse gang's nest. The man needed doctors and medicine. He had to hurry, and the place closest to the meadow where the broken arm could be healed happened to be the left tent palace. Mo Shanshan insisted on bringing the disciples of the Black Ink Garden to the palace after the provisions were destroyed. Ning Ke did not object. Besides the friendship made in the battle, there was another reason. No matter the person behind the horse gang was the Chanyu of the palace or someone else, he firmly believed that as long as the leader of the horse gang was still alive, there was at least a 90% chance that he was hiding in the palace. He wanted to find him, ask him some questions, and then kill him. In addition, he was also reflecting on what he had done after leaving the academy and coming to the wilderness. Since he was very young, after every difficult battle of life and death, he would analyze and summarize afterwards. That was why he survived with Sang Sang. Reflection had become a kind of instinct for him. However, this reflection in the horse carriage was deeper than all the reflections in the past years. He even traced back to all the actions he had done after leaving the city of Wei and entering Chang'an. After thinking silently for a long time, he confirmed that after leaving the city of Wei, especially after entering the academy, many of his actions or choices were not the most appropriate one, because he had fallen into some kind of misunderstanding. When he was in the city of Wei, he was used to riding alone into the wilderness to spy on the enemy for the general and chase the horse gang with his fellows. So this time, when he brought the students of the academy to the wilderness to practice, he was still used to doing things like this with the two important tasks given by His Majesty and the Nation Master. He disguised himself and mixed into the grain team, thinking only to act secretly. However, he forgot that he was no longer a small soldier in the city of Wei, not a scout, not a woodcutter in Shubi Lake, but a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, a student of the back mountain of the academy, a golden secret agent of His Majesty, and a visiting professor of the South School of Haoyan Taoism and the Imperial Center Administration. Doing things secretly meant that his background, which was admired and respected by countless people, was all meaningless. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall knew that Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict, so he did not dare to talk nonsense. If he showed his identity as a disciple of the back mountain of the academy, how would the horse gang dare to attack him? There was also a very important point. Before leaving the academy, Second Brother specially reminded him in the back mountain that people from the academy could only bully others and not be bullied. How arrogant he was. But now he did not have the identity of a disciple of the back mountain of the academy. Even if he was arrogant, who would know that he was from the academy? Ninkei supported his chin with his hand and leaned against the window of the carriage. He looked at the mountains and the faintly visible tents in the distance and sighed helplessly. A poor boy from the countryside who made a lot of money in the city would only secretly buy some houses and eat a few bowls of hot and sour noodle slice soup. It would take some time for him to get used to bullying others after all. It was the middle of winter and the weather was freezing. The grassland at the foot of Tianchi Mountain was covered with green grass in the east and west, maybe because of the geothermal heat in the mountain. The tents were in full bloom in the grassland like white clouds. 2 carriages and a few tired horses carried the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom to the grassland. There was no grain team behind them, nor any cavalry guards. It looked a little sad. The peace talks between the left tent palace of the grassland barbarians and the coalition forces of the Central Plains had officially begun. All forces gathered here with their cavalries. Noisy and lively sounds could be heard from afar. No one knew how many people were drinking and talking. A cavalry of the palace welcomed the disciples of the Black Ink Garden into the camp. Obviously, the news of the attack on the meadow and the half-divine talisman had spread. Some people knew that the calligraphy addict was in the carriage, so the cavalry behaved respectfully. On the contrary, the messengers and guards from the Central Plains in the camp looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden coldly. They did not understand why these people did not return to the north of Yin Kingdom when the provisions were destroyed. Did these disciples of the Black Ink Garden not know that some bigwigs in the Divine Hall and the coalition forces were extremely dissatisfied with their performance? 2 more days, and I'm already dying. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 226. A dozen tired horses and dusty carriages could not affect the situation in the wilderness, and the negotiation between the barbarian royal court and the Central Plains Coalition Army had nothing to do with them. They had been robbed by the horse gang, but they still insisted on coming here. The Black Ink Garden disciples themselves knew that they wanted to seek justice, but in others' eyes, they were forced to come here to wait for the Divine Hall's decision. The future was bleak, so no one would be willing to come here, even if it was said that the calligraphy addict was in that carriage. The grassland by the mountain was boundless. Although tens of thousands of people gathered here in the middle of winter and tents were in full bloom, there was still enough space to accommodate people. To show their sincerity, the royal court agreed to let the Central Plains Coalition Army choose a place to camp and deploy people. The person in charge of this matter was a manager of the West Hill Divine Palace. After he indifferently greeted Zhuo Jihua, he directly led the Black Ink Garden disciples to a place. The 2 tents were not far from the Coalition Army's central tent, just behind it. However, it seemed a little remote and the terrain was slightly higher. The Black Ink Garden disciples walked into the tents and looked at the pre-prepared equipment. They found that it was not bad, and they knew that the Coalition Army gave them some face because of the Hill Master. However, from the time they were picked up by the royal court's cavalry to this moment, except for the manager of the Divine Hall, no one from the top of the Coalition Army or the bigwigs of the Divine Hall showed up. In addition, they saw the indifferent eyes of the people from the Central Plains countries along the way. The Black Ink Garden disciples knew that they were deliberately excluded and forgotten, so they inevitably felt a little depressed. Catgirl was too young, so naturally, she didn't think too much. She looked at the thick woolen mattress inside the tent and thought that she could finally have a good sleep tonight. She didn't have to squeeze with the mountain master in the narrow carriage, so she seemed a little happy. Ninkei had experienced being excluded and deliberately forgotten in the academy last year, so he was very used to it and did not care much. He just felt that the location of the camp seemed a little inappropriate. He walked out of the tent and looked into the distance. The big black horse, carrying a heavy luggage, walked to him and gently nudged him with its head. It made an unpleasant sound like bellows and seemed to be extremely tired. Ninkei stroked the mane on its neck and scolded it with a smile. "Don't always complain in front of me. It's just a small thing. You don't have to work so hard." We're leaving soon, so don't be in a hurry to unload your luggage. If you're hungry, you can find some grass to eat." The big black horse opened its eyes wide and looked at the faintly discernible grass in the winter wind. It thought painfully that the grass was even less than the hair on the barbarians' heads. How could it be full? The big black horse had a violent temperament, but if it was tamed, it would undoubtedly be a rare steed in the world. If others found out about its real strength, they would definitely treat it like a treasure. No one would treat it like a dog raised casually by their family like Ninkei, who would kick it out of the house to pick up the leftover bones of their neighbors when there was no food at home. However, it only obeyed Ninkei's discipline. Seeing that Ninkei had no intention of asking for hay for it, it dejectedly kicked its hooves and walked out of the camp. It did not know where it could find something to eat. It was still early, but due to the short and bitter winter days in the north, the sun in the sky was faintly approaching dusk. It slowly fell to the ground, and the light gradually became dim. A cold wind came from behind the gentle slope. Ninkei took a cotton scarf out of nowhere and stuffed it into his collar. He said to Zhuozhihua beside him, "It's windy here. It'll be cold at night." Zhuozhihua was the oldest among the disciples of Black Ink Garden. She had a gentle and peaceful temperament. Hearing Ninkei's reminder, she knew that the previous Divine Hall manager brought them here to camp with such a boring and mean intention. Even she felt a little annoyed, but did not know how to deal with it. Ninkei pulled a grassland man passing by and said a long sentence with a gentle and sincere expression. Mo Shanshan did not get off the carriage until she heard Ninkei's difficult words. She lifted the curtain and got off. After the grassland man left, she walked to his side and frowned, saying, "Senior brother, you even know the barbarian language?" Because the Tang Empire was powerful and the Divine Hall kept preaching, the language of the Central Plains had become extremely popular on the grassland. However, there were still many barbarians who were used to speaking their old language, which was the so-called barbarian language. Ninkei said, "I speak the Western barbarian language better." Zhuozhihua asked, "Senior brother Zhong, what did you say to that man before?" "I asked him if he could set up a tent on the grassland." Ninkei smiled and continued, "The barbarian said that we are the most distinguished guests of Chanyu. So as long as it is Chanyu's grassland, we can choose any place to live." Hearing this, the disciples of Black Ink Garden outside the tent all understood what he meant. They all laughed and thought that it was not bad to choose another camp. Since the Divine Hall treated them so well, there was no need to be too close to them. Zhuozhihua looked at Ninkei with a smile and thought that there were no mature men in the same sect. When facing many problems and choices, they indeed lacked courage. Even the Hill Master could not change the situation. "Where should we move?" Ninkei looked at the grassland. According to the edict of the Divine Hall, all the countries of the Central Plains had sent people to help Yin Kingdom in the war. At least hundreds of thousands of people were gathered on the two front lines of the frontier fortress of North Yin Kingdom. However, now that they were deep in the wilderness for peace talks, it was impossible for all the countries to bring all of them. But the cavalries guarding the nobles gathered together, at least 1,000 cavalries. On the grassland under the setting sun, the flags were fluttering. There were not many tents on the grassland in the west, but they were arranged in a very orderly manner. The flags fluttering in the cold wind also looked particularly spirited. As for the faintly visible cavalries, they were much more orderly and solemn than the cavalries of the Central Plains Coalition Army here. People usually thought that the most elite cavalries in the world were the papal guardians of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, the number of cavalries of the Divine Hall was too small. According to the scriptures, the number of cavalries was strictly limited to less than 1,000. Therefore, the truly powerful cavalries that dared to conquer the world were the other two. In the wilderness on the other side of Tianqi Mountain, the palace cavalries under the command of Golden Chanyu and the cavalries of the Tang Empire. Ninkei pointed to the orderly tents on the west side of the grassland and those familiar military flags. He said, "We will camp there." The disciples of Black Ink Garden recognized that it was the camp of the Tang army. They were slightly startled and agreed to his suggestion after a moment. The Great River Kingdom and the Tang Empire had been on good terms for generations. Now they were all here under the edict of the Divine Hall. They believed that no one would say anything mean to them if they set up camp there. Unfortunately, the inexperienced girls of the Great River Kingdom still did not expect that they would abandon the camp designated by the Divine Hall and choose to live next to the Tang camp. This still attracted many people's attention and caused a lot of criticism. Looking at the dozen tired horses and dusty carriages walking towards the Tang camp in the twilight, the swordsmen from the South Jin Kingdom looked indifferent. The monks of the Yueluan Kingdom looked sarcastic. The manager of the Divine Hall said with a gloomy expression, "If you want to ride on the Tang's coattails, then go ahead. I know that there is no rest today, so I have been riding. But as you all know, it is getting slower and slower. I will do my best. Girls, hug me and give me encouragement." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 2:27. The wilderness in winter was still cold, even with the mountains blocking the wind and hot springs flowing. The palace and the Central Plains country's negotiations had been going on for several days and had entered the most heated stage. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted the nobles here, because the Chanyu princess liked flowers very much. Due to the climate of the wilderness, she could not cultivate them properly. Therefore, she wrote a letter to the Divine Hall to let the flower addict Lu Chenjia come to the palace for a while so that she could learn from her. This had nothing to do with the negotiations, but it started when the negotiations were in a deadlock. Just like the food sent by the girls from the Great River Kingdom, it was a secondary exchange of feelings. Both the barbarians, the Left King's palace, and the Central Plains countries did not want the war to continue. The reason for the plundering and the subsequent conflicts was because of the desolate man's return to the south. The former was a problem of resources, the latter was a problem of attitude. The so-called negotiations were just the two sides haggling over the number of troops to be sent and the supply of food. Facing the hundreds of thousands of desolate men who had reappeared after 1,000 years, it was reasonable for both sides to join forces to resist. But who should be in charge of this, and who should send more troops? The desolate man were born warriors. In the bloody battle in the north at the beginning of spring, the grassland cavalrymen suffered heavy casualties, which once again proved this almost forgotten theory. If they wanted to stop the desolate man from going south, or even drive them back to the extremely cold north, they would have to pay a heavy price. Who would be willing to let their own army be at the forefront? Regarding this matter, the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire both showed a very tough attitude. The army pressed on the long frontier fortress in the north of Yan Kingdom, and the young cultivators of various sects were sent out. The grassland Left King's palace had already been seriously damaged in the war with the desolate man. In the face of such a situation, even if Chanyu wanted to show his toughness, he did not have much confidence. Negotiations depended on who had the stronger spine and who had the more confidence. Once one side was not confident enough and lowered his head, the negotiations would naturally be much smoother. On the second day, when Ning Ke and the disciples of Black Ink Garden arrived at the palace, the two sides finally reached a consensus. Before the second wave of fertile grass grew at the turn of the next spring and summer, the Left King's palace would send their main force to the north to attack the desolate man's tribe. As for the Central Plains, they only agreed to send about 6,000 cavalry troops, but promised to give the Left King's palace the most generous financial aid. They also agreed to provide most of the food and armaments that the Left King's palace needed. The news of the successful negotiation was carried by the winter wind and spread across the entire meadow at the fastest speed possible. The cloud-like tents were filled with either enthusiastic cheers or low curses. The royal court tribe began to prepare strong wine and delicacies. Other than that, they also decided to hold an impromptu Gumumu meeting. Gumumu was a barbarian word that meant a joyous gathering. It would only be held during the grandest festival in the grasslands. The royal court had decided to hold a Gumumu gathering at the last minute. Firstly, it was to celebrate the success of the peace talks. Secondly, it was to use this opportunity to allow the people of the royal court tribe to interact with the people of the Central Plains. As for whether this intention could be realized or not, no one knew. The sound of the zither, the horn sounded, and all kinds of colorful banners flew in the wind. People from all over gathered on the meadow. It was extremely lively, especially outside the open area where the competition of horsemanship and archery was held. It was densely packed. The people in leather or cotton-padded jackets did not stand shoulder to shoulder like brothers. They still stood together with their companions and had their own camps. However, this did not stop them from cheering when they saw the wonderful horsemanship performance in the Gamumu meeting. The sheep-catching competition ended, and the winning rider received a generous reward. This also made the following archery competition even more exciting. A royal court archer successfully defeated his opponent with his superb archery skills. The arrows on the red target seemed to overlap, causing the crowd to cheer loudly. Ninkei and the Great River Girls stopped in the crowd to watch. No one from the Divine Hall paid attention to the arrival of the Black Ink Garden disciples. They were also free and simply came out of the tent to watch the show. Mo Shanshan stayed in the tent, as usual, to write. No one tried to persuade her otherwise. Catgirl looked at the royal court archer, who was being carried on the shoulders of a fellow tribesman, and snorted in disdain. She tugged at Ning Kei's sleeve and said, "Senior brother, why don't you participate in the competition? Whether it is horsemanship or archery, these people are far worse than you. Why don't you go up and win back all the rewards?" Ning Kei glanced at her and said with a smile, "Of course not." Facing this little girl, he always felt that he was looking at Sang Sang when she was young. Therefore, both his expression and words naturally revealed a sense of closeness. Those who dare to compete in the Gamumu meeting are all the best hunters in the grassland. The archer from the Yin Kingdom is also very powerful. Even if I participate in the competition, how can I win? This was the truth. Whether it was the wilderness or the Central Plains, there were many hidden talents. There was no reason to win. This was also a lie. If Ninkei had used his full strength, whether it was the sheep-catching competition earlier or the archery competition now, no one present could beat him. Catgirl looked at him and sighed helplessly. "Senior brother, you are good at everything except for being too humble." Ninkei could not help but laugh. He thought that whether it was Mo Shanshan or Catgirl, they always used various ways to praise him directly and sincerely. If he spent too much time with these pure Great River Kingdom girls, he was really worried that one day he would float up to the sky. He rubbed her head affectionately and said, "When you grow up, you will understand that if you always want to be in the limelight, there will be a time when you will be blown by the wind and break your back." The people of the Great River Kingdom were deeply influenced by the Tang Empire. They were persevering, concise, and yearned for victory. They placed great importance on honor and treated it as their lives. Therefore, Catgirl did not understand why he would say this. Her bright eyes were filled with confusion. During the Gamumu meeting, other than the various competitions and entertainment, the Palace tribe also provided many delicacies for the participants. Catgirl's attention was attracted by the fragrant roasted leg of lamb, and she instantly forgot her previous doubts. Zhuji and the other Great River Kingdom girls were also attracted by the milk tea and other foreign delicacies that they had never seen before and gradually dispersed into the crowd. After the peace treaty was concluded, it was the season of revelry. At this time, the palace's meadow was undoubtedly the safest place in the world. Ninkei looked at the curious and eager Great River Kingdom girls in front of the various food stalls and smiled. He was not too worried. The meadow in the distance suddenly became even more lively. Noisy cheers and cheers rose and fell. The winter clouds in the sky seemed to be shaken away by the heat wave. Catgirl held the large roasted leg of lamb. Her bright eyes were wide open as she looked curiously in that direction. However, she could not see what was happening because of the crowd. The horse racing must have started. Ninkei took the roasted leg of lamb that she could barely hold in her small hands. He took out a handkerchief and handed it to her, indicating for her to wipe off the oil stain at the corner of her lips. He continued, "The people of the wilderness live as nomads and are best at riding and shooting. Horses are extremely important to them, so horse racing is the most important event of the Gamumu meeting." Catgirl said excitedly, "Senior brother, I want to go and watch." Ninkei held the greasy leg of lamb in one hand and Catgirl's hand in the other as they walked towards the periphery of the crowd. He did not bring her to the edge of the racing meadow. Instead, he walked to a gentle slope outside the tent. The grass on the slope had long turned yellow and lay sparsely on the ground, waiting for the next spring. Although the wind was strong, the view was excellent. They could clearly see the horse racing on the meadow. Because the people from the Central Plains were participating in the Gumumu meeting, the palace paid special attention to it, especially to the horse racing that they were best at. The tribe had specially vacated hundreds of tents just for this, and had enclosed a large piece of land in the middle of the meadow. Horse racing was a competition of speed. It was simple, direct, and exciting. At this moment, the race had already begun. More than 10 majestic horses were galloping on the meadow. The hooves of the horses were like rain, kicking up gravel and dust everywhere. Those with good eyesight would be able to see the muscles under the shining skin of the horses trembling as they exerted their strength. The edge of the empty meadow was surrounded by fences. It was the race track. Ninkei stood on the gentle slope and looked down. With a quick glance, he could tell that they had already run a third of the race. The dozen or so horses had gradually separated into two groups according to their strength. There were 3 horses at the front, leading the charge. Based on the attire of the riders, one could roughly tell that the first 3 horses belonged to the palace, the Divine Hall, and the Tang army. The horse that the Divine Hall riders rode on was snow-white in color. Its forehooves were strong and powerful. When it galloped at full speed, it left white afterimages in its wake, as if it was a snowstorm. Ninkei was different from most soldiers. He had never been a horse lover. However, he had been at the frontier fortress of Wei for many years and naturally knew about horses. He looked at the snow-white horse and could not help but exclaim, "This horse is not bad. If it has a good rider, it will probably only be slightly worse than that silly thing." As he said this, his right hand was still holding up the greasy leg of lamb, which made him look a little funny. Cat Girl was holding a small knife that she had just bought from a herdsman. She was trying to cut off a perfect piece of meat from the leg of lamb. When she heard this, she said unhappily, "How is Big Black silly? Speaking of which, senior brother, you make it carry such heavy things every day, and you don't give it any good food. Even if it becomes silly, it will still be bullied by you." The Big Black that the little girl mentioned was naturally the Big Black horse. To make it convenient for the nobles to watch the race, the racetrack was specially set up in front of the palace tent. A group of nobles stood in front of the tent and watched the intense horse race, smiling as they discussed. In a luxurious corner of the palace tent, Princess Chanyu looked at the quiet girl beside her and said with a smile, "Princess Chunjia, it seems that this horse will not embarrass you." The snow-white horse in front of the field was the mount that Princess Chanyu had given to the girl last night. Today, it was ridden by a cavalryman of Divine Hall, and its performance was indeed extraordinary. The girl smiled and replied, "Thank you, Princess, for your generous gift." The princess looked at the girl's elegant face and thought of her story. Her smile became warmer and warmer. If it was an ordinary horse, how could it be worthy of a love-struck fool like you? Oh yes, speaking of which, what do you want to name it? The girl looked at the snow-white horse galloping on the field and felt a little happy. Then she thought of that person's dislike of complicated descriptions. After thinking for a moment, she said softly, "Let's call it Little Snow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 228. In the middle of the fierce horse race, more than 10 fine horses had finished 1/3 of the distance with smoke and dust. In front of the palace knight's yellow buckskin horse and a Tang soldier's jade-spotted horse was the snow-white fine horse that firmly occupied the first place. Judging from the snow horse's gentle nodding frequency and steady pace, it should still have energy left. It seemed that if the race continued like this, it would undoubtedly be the first to cross the finish line. However, at this moment, a burst of surprised and shocked shouts rang out from the beginning of the racetrack. Countless people cried out in surprise, not knowing what they had seen. Ninkei and Cat Girl looked in the direction of the sound and saw a pure black horse rushing onto the track. It was like an arrow leaving the bow, chasing the horses in front at a terrifying speed. The horse race had already started. No one knew where the big black horse came from. There was no one on the horse and no master to control it. No one knew why it ran onto the track. Ninkei looked at the big black horse and opened his mouth slightly, but he did not know what to say. Catgirl rubbed her eyes with the back of her fingers and said curiously, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The big black horse seemed to have been stimulated by the horse races on the grassland. After it rushed onto the track, it ran faster and faster without the whips and kicks of the jockeys. Its four powerful hooves quickly kicked on the slightly hard ground, kicking up black flowers one after another. Its body gradually dragged out a black shadow. The onlookers looked at the terrifyingly fast big black horse and could not help but be dumbfounded and shocked. They did not know that there was a horse that could run so fast in the world. In the dense crowd, as the big black horse's hoofbeats passed by, there was a wave of exclamations. The people who participated in the Gomumu gathering all knew some riding skills. Although the weight of the horse was lighter without a rider on its back, without the rider's command, the horse did not know how to allocate its strength. Moreover, it lacked the stimulation of pain during the final sprint. Therefore, although people were shocked by the speed of the big black horse, they still did not think it could catch up with the horses in front, not to mention that the horses in front had already run a long distance. Based on this idea, although the people along the way were still amazed by the sudden appearance of the big black horse and its amazing speed, those who were concerned about the outcome of the horse race had already turned their attention to the front. The palace had prepared a large field for this horse race. Since the journey was far away, the distance between the horses was widening due to the difference in strength. The two horses of the palace and the Tang army were still struggling to catch up with the white horse in front, but it was obvious that it was impossible for them to catch up. Entering the wilderness to negotiate with Chan Yu of the Left King's palace was of great importance. For this matter, the Tang Empire specially sent General Xu Chengshu from the military ministry to take charge of this matter. At this time, the general who came from afar stood in front of the king's tent, watching the situation of the horse race in the wilderness. He listened to the conversation between the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall and Chan Yu, and his expression seemed a little gloomy. The elites of the Iron Cavalry sweep across the world by relying on their battle prowess. It's not like the fastest runner is the best. General Xu thought so in his heart, but he watched helplessly as the horses of the Tang army had no hope of winning and were even left further and further behind by the white horse. Thinking that the white horse was a gift from the palace to the Divine Hall, how could he be reconciled to it? When the bigwigs in front of the king's tent were all focused on the three horses in the front, on the wilderness, exclamations and cheers came from afar like real waves, getting closer and closer. Chan Yu and the priest of the Revelation Department of the Divine Hall, who were talking enthusiastically, were slightly startled. They raised their eyes to look into the distance, wondering what was happening over there. General Xu was no exception, and his brows gradually furrowed. They had already heard the exclamations and cheers before, but they did not expect that it had something to do with the horse race. The wave-like exclamations and cheers were naturally related to the big black horse. When it violently swept past people like a gust of wind, people only had time to exclaim in surprise. The wave-like exclamations and cheers spread faster and faster, which meant that it was running faster and faster, and was about to catch up with the horses in front. People's initial thoughts were not wrong. A horse without a master would not know how to allocate its strength in a long-distance race. However, the reason that overturned people's judgment was very simple, because the big black horse did not need to allocate its strength at all. Its strong body seemed to contain endless power, so why would it conserve its strength? Under the sunlight of the wilderness, the big black horse's skin was incomparably dark, emitting a charming luster. As it madly sprinted, its muscles tightened and relaxed at a high speed, as if they were trembling. The terrifying speed made the hoof shadow under its body almost invisible to the naked eye, and it easily overtook the horse in the back. One should know that the horse in front had already run a third of the way before the big black horse sneaked onto the track from the starting hurdle. However, it had actually caught up with them before they reached the finish line. This kind of speed really made people unable to believe their eyes. The big black horse continued sprinting madly, overtaking the second horse, the third horse, without any pause or hesitation. Its reddish eyes could not see its own kind at all, and only knew to keep overtaking and moving forward. The people participating in the Gumumu meeting in the wilderness were shocked speechless by the scene before them. They could only subconsciously stretch out their hands to hold their heads and let out exclamations of excitement. Some of the herdsmen even began to suspect that the big black horse was the legendary Pegasus. Otherwise, how could it run so fast? No one knew where the big black horse came from or who it belonged to, but they were deeply shocked by the power and speed it displayed, especially when they saw it surpass the other horses with an indomitable momentum. Everyone's blood was ignited by this black shadow, and they began to crazily cheer for it. The big black horse overtook the jade-spotted horse of the Tang army. The big black horse overtook the palace's yellow buckskin horse. Just when everyone present, including the bigwigs in front of the king's tent, were shocked speechless, the big black horse continued to shock the wilderness. It unstoppably caught up to the Divine Hall's snow-white steed. The white horse was astonishingly fast, like a silver dragon, while the big black horse was like a violent black sandstorm, trying to drown the silver dragon in front of it. In a corner of the king's tent, the Chanyu princess could not hide her shock and reached out to cover her mouth. In order to choose a gift for the flower addict, Lu Chenjia, the palace tribe had chosen for a long time before they finally picked out a snow-white horse without any impurities, and it was extraordinarily handsome. She did not expect it to be challenged at this time. Lu Chenjia, the princess of Yueluan Kingdom, who had been sitting quietly and looking at the pot of snow lotus beside her, was attracted by the commotion outside and the expression of the princess. She turned her head to look at the wilderness, and her slender eyebrows slightly raised. The knight of the Divine Hall on the back of the white horse heard the hoofbeats behind him getting clearer and clearer. Based on his years of experience, he knew that his opponent was catching up. He looked back and was shocked by the huge black horse's head. This was because the eyes of this strange big black horse were too strange. The bright eyes were filled with madness and violent emotions, and there were a few streaks of blood. It looked as if it wanted to bite him to death. In fact, the big black horse really opened its mouth, showing its white teeth, and bit the air as if it was crazy. After all, the speed was too fast, and the big black horse could not bite the white horse's swaying tail in the air. It stared at the white horse's buttocks with hatred, and the speed of its four hooves on the ground increased and instantly surpassed the white horse's buttocks. The onlookers in the wilderness let out a deafening cheer. The knight of the Divine Hall on the white horse was shocked. His body bent forward, and his right hand that was holding the horsewhip tightened. He knew that the white horse under him was a gift from the palace to the noblewoman. It was already a great honor for him to be riding on her behalf. If he lost today, it would be a terrible ending. Since the beginning of the race, the knight of the Divine Hall had only waved the horsewhip twice in the air and not once on the white horse. That was because he did not have the guts to leave a bloody mark on the noblewoman's horse. However, the situation was so tense, and the big black horse that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have the ability to surpass him. He made up his mind and was ready to whip the horse's buttocks. At this moment, no one expected that after the big white horse noticed the big black horse. It seemed to be greatly stimulated. It did not even need the knight to whip it, and suddenly began to speed up. It was only then that the people in the wilderness realized that the snow-white horse had not exerted its full speed. That was why it looked so graceful and stable before. Now it was stimulated by the big black horse, and finally began to display all its abilities. It was no longer graceful, and actually began to run extremely crazily. A white snowstorm had officially begun, and the black shadow followed closely behind, not willing to fall behind at all. The cheers and shouts of surprise in the wilderness reached their climax at this moment. The winter clouds drifting in the sky dispersed one by one. Between the heaven and earth, there was a clear light. Visibility was very clear. The big white horse and the big black horse were almost neck and neck, but the white horse was half a body length ahead. At this time, both of them were sprinting with all their might, madly kicking their hooves and swinging their heads. They did not care about running elegantly, and they were running crazily. The relative speed between the two seemed to be extremely slow or even about to stop. The finish line was not far ahead. The spectators in the wilderness gradually had a feeling that the big black horse could never surpass it. Many of them felt extremely regretful and sighed in their hearts. The big black horse did not have time to sigh. Since it was born, It had stayed in the military camp on the north side of the Tang Empire and in the horse farm outside Chong, and it had bullied countless of its own kind and countless humans, but it had only been bullied by one human. It was the first time for it to run desperately like today, and it was the first time for it to breathe so heavily. Everyone thought that it could not surpass the white horse in front of it, but it was not convinced, unwilling to accept its fate. It squeezed out all the strength in its body, burned all the desire, and still sped up in the impossible. The tips of its hooves stepped on the black soil, and it caught up with the white horse inch by inch, like the shadow of the night attacking the earth. The horse's hooves broke the black soil, and the night shadow swallowed the wind and snow. Just before the finish line, it finally succeeded in surpassing the white horse and was the first to rush over. There was a silence in the wilderness, and then there was deafening cheers. The bigwigs in front of the king's tent were silent, and then there were countless exclamations. Some sharp-eyed powerhouses even noticed that just before it rushed over the finish line, the big black horse still had the strength to look back at the white horse mockingly. At the same time, it flipped its thick lips at high speed, looking extremely disdainful. General Shu of the Tang Empire looked at the big black horse in a daze and murmured, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The chief figure of the Divine Hall, who participated in the negotiation of the palace, was the priest of the Revelation Department. He looked at the group of horses rushing over the finish line, frowned, and glanced at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall beside him. The gaze of the priest of the Revelation Department was very indifferent, very cold. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall felt very cold, very cold. He knew the hidden meaning in the priest's indifferent gaze, because the cavalryman of Divine Hall who rode on the white horse was the best knight he had specially selected in advance. However, riding on Princess Chinjia's horse, he inexplicably lost to a big black horse that came out of nowhere, and in such a way. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall were under the jurisdiction of the Judicial Department, not directly under the Revelation Department. But the priest was a person of high status, and if Princess Chunjia was displeased because of this, how would Prince Longqing deal with him? The more the commander thought about it, the more scared he became. He stared at the big black horse that was panting in the field and thought to himself, "Where did this beast come from? I will definitely kill it after this." Which tribe does this big black horse belong to? Standing at the forefront, Chan Yu of the Left King's palace looked at the dark and shiny steed under the sun, and his heart was filled with infinite love. He waved his hand and said, "Go and ask. I want it. I can exchange anything for it." There was some distance between the gentle slope and the grassland, but Ninkei had no reason not to recognize a silly horse, especially when the big black horse turned its head and glanced at him before crossing the finishing line and rolled its thick lips. It was unique. He thought speechlessly, what's wrong with this guy today? It actually wanted to race with others, which was completely inconsistent with its usual laziness. Halfway through, Cat Girl had confirmed that the big black horse was the horse of her senior brother beside her. At this time, seeing that the big black horse had won the ultimate incredible victory, she excitedly jumped on the gentle slope and clapped her hands. She grabbed Ninkei's sleeves and kept shaking and said excitedly, "Senior brother, look, look, big black one." Ninkei sighed and said, "This guy really likes to be in the limelight. Why is he not like me at all?" Cat Girl's excitement was disturbed by his sigh, and she pouted and said, "I just don't understand. What's wrong with being in the limelight? You should know that victory is the greatest honor." Ninkei did not answer the little girl and thought helplessly in his heart, "Big Black Horse is so arrogant in public. What if someone recognizes him? I was still hesitating about when to reveal my identity, and now I'm forced to be led by a horse? But shouldn't he be leading the horse?" The intense horse race made the hearts of all the people attending the Gamumu meeting beat faster, and they forgot everything around them. Cat Girl, who knew the origin of the big black horse, was even more nervous. The leg of lamb that she had received from Ninkei was nowhere to be found, and her hands were empty with the mutton fat and fragrance. She carefully wiped her hands with a handkerchief and thought for a while, and said to Ninkei, "Senior brother, your handkerchief is dirty. I'll wash it and return it to you, okay?" Ninkei smiled and took the handkerchief directly, and said, I know how to do this kind of thing. Everything on him and in his bag was prepared by Sang Sang before he left, so he had been very careful. If he lost the handkerchief in the wilderness, he was worried that he would not be able to explain it to his family in Chang'an. Catgirl's words had no other meaning, and she did not know what Ning Ke was thinking at this time. Looking at the big black horse in the wilderness, she happily waved and said with a smile, "Senior brother, don't be fooled by the fact that you don't feed big black horse and enslave it every day, but it will shine when it needs to shine. If you don't treat it well, it will be taken away by someone in the future, and it won't miss you. Don't regret it then." Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but think of a busy, skinny back and a dark face. His heart could not help but shrink. As the heavenly cat girl looked down, his heart could not help but shrink. In shock, he held the heavenly cat girl in his arms as fast as he could and covered her eyes with his hands. In the wilderness, the horses that had rushed past the finish line were all panting heavily, kicking their front hooves from time to time to recover their strength according to their familiar method. The riders on the horses were also helped to rest. The big black horse's strength recovered extremely quickly, and it only took a short time for it to be as energetic as before. More than a dozen people from the palace surrounded it, looking at it curiously and asking around who its master was. The big black horse seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. It gently shook its head and looked extremely proud. From time to time, it stuck out its long red tongue and licked its thick lips. Not far away, the snow-white horse was panting violently, being led by a knight of the divine hall to walk slowly to the side. Seeing the big black horse rolling its tongue and licking its lips, there was hatred in its eyes. The big black horse happened to see this scene and was greatly stimulated by Ning Ke's death threat. It crazily pushed away the people around it and rushed toward the white horse. The white horse was also a talented horse, but it had never seen such a thick-skinned and abnormally strong horse like the big black horse. It wanted to kick back to defend itself, but it was too weak to resist. The big black horse bit the back of the white horse's neck. It did not bleed, but it did not hold back its teeth. The white horse let out a sad cry. The big black horse bit the white horse's mane and put its front hooves on it. Its strong body pressed on the white horse unreasonably. Looking at it, anyone could guess what it would do next. There was a burst of laughter from all around. The princess looked extremely embarrassed. She stood up and scolded her subordinates to quickly separate the two horses. Lu Chenjiao looked there quietly, her expression still as pure as an orchid that had just bloomed. However, her hands and her sleeves gradually clenched. Suddenly, there was a sharp whistle from afar. The big black horse seemed to have heard the soul-sucking bell. It shivered all over and got off the horse. It knocked away the people around it who wanted to restrain it, and like a black flash, it rushed out of the camp and began to run crazily again. As it ran, it thought proudly, "I only ate a meal from your trough last night. White horse, you bitch, how dare you call a bunch of sisters to deal with me? Do you really think I can't deal with you?" The cold wind was like a knife. The big black horse was full of heroism, and its hooves were dancing. If I don't have some craziness, I really can't win anything. There is still one day left. I thought I would be too lazy to ask for votes before the completion of the 10,000 words in 7 days. But I realized that the last step was too hard. I have lost all my heroism, and I'm already a scum. Brothers and sisters, if you have recommendation votes or monthly votes, please throw them to me and stimulate me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 229. Ignoring the bustle in the wilderness. Ning Ke returned to the camp with Catgirl. He lifted the curtain and walked into the tent. He glanced at the luggage piled in the corner and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was concentrating on writing calligraphy. He asked, "Wasn't my black horse tied outside the tent? Why did it slip out?" Mo Shanshan put down the brush in her hand and looked back at him. She explained expressionlessly, "You tied it up after it came back in the morning. After you left, I was the only one left in the tent. It kept barking and kicking its hooves. It looked like it wanted to go out to play, so I untied the rope and let it play on its own." Ning Ke looked at her and didn't know what to say. He scratched his head and said, "You let it go when it wanted to go out. Why does this sound wrong? It's a horse, not a human. The big black horse is very intelligent. I can understand what it wants to say. After saying this, Emo Shan Shan didn't want to explain more about this matter. She turned around and picked up the brush on the inkstone, ready to continue copying. Catgirl ran to her excitedly and said, "Senior sister, you are right. The big black horse is more than intelligent. It's so powerful. Do you know that many people are chasing after it?" Emo Shan Shan slightly raised her black eyebrows and asked, "What happened?" Catgirl carefully told the process of the big black horse's appearance and winning the horse race. Then she said, "As for what happened in the end, senior brother covered my eyes, so I didn't see it." Emo Shan Shan looked at Ning Quebec Ning K wondered how he should describe that scene. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and coughed twice. He pretended not to see Emo Shan Shan's gaze and walked out of the tent. Standing on the slightly hard winter wilderness and looking at the fluttering flag of the Tang army and the heavily guarded camp not far from the west, he began to think about other problems. Where should he start to find the head of the horse gang? As the representative of the Tang Empire in this negotiation, General Xu Chang brought his trusted subordinates and traveled thousands of miles from Chang into this place. The safety of the 300 elite cavalrymen of the Northeast Border Military was in charge of the security. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the occasional neighing of horses could be heard. The tents were arranged in an orderly manner, and the Tang camp was densely packed. In the tent in the center of the Tang camp, General Xu Cheng took off his helmet and carelessly stroked his gray hair. He sat behind the table and signaled his subordinates to prepare some food. He drank a lot in the king's tent, but he could not eat his fill. General Xu held his fork and food as he ate, remaining silent. The subordinate next to him noticed that the general was deep in thought. He thought that the general was in a bad mood after hearing some gossip about today's horse race. After thinking for a while, he comforted, "General, our cavalry is good at fighting. We are really not good at this kind of pure racing. If we lost, we lost. If that old aunt wants to gossip, no one can stop her. That old woman doesn't know shit," General Xu said mockingly. As a general of the Tang Empire, he had to be careful with his words when he respected Cuny Madi as the sister of the Yuelan Kingdom's king. But in this private military tent, he was not in the mood to give that aunt any face. Seeing that the general was really not upset about this matter, the subordinate thought of another matter. He glanced at the patrolling soldiers outside the tent and asked in a low voice, "General, are you worried about Tiang City?" In the summer, the imperial court confirmed that the matter of assisting the Northern Yin expedition would be presided over by the Tang Empire's Eastern Army, General Xiaohou. But no one would have thought that when the Central Plains began to negotiate with the grassland barbarians, His Majesty had already ordered the military ministry to intervene in this matter. Although General Xu Chang came to the palace on imperial orders, it inevitably angered the border military. When he passed by Tuyang City, General Xiaohou used the excuse of patrolling the border and did not even want to see him. If I were General Xiaohou, I would not be happy either. General Xu Chang smiled slightly and put down the chopsticks in his hand. He took the towel and wiped his face casually. He said, "Don't guess blindly. I am indeed thinking about something, but it has nothing to do with the two things you guessed." The subordinate frowned slightly and thought that the two sides had reached an agreement. The next thing to do was to discuss the northern expedition next year with the Central Plains Coalition Army and the specific matters of assisting the Left Tent Palace. Everything would be done naturally. If the general was not upset about losing the horse race and not worried about the anger of Tuyang City, then what was he thinking about? "I am thinking about the big black horse," General Xu Chang said with a smile. The subordinate suddenly understood and thought that he finally understood the general's thoughts. After a moment of thought, he said, "Chan Yu seems to be very interested in that fine horse. But since the general likes it, I will think of some ways to inform the steward of the king's tent later. I believe that Chan Yu will not be stingy with the horse to show his closeness to the Tang Empire." General Xu Cheng looked at the subordinate and sighed helplessly. He scolded, "I don't know what is going on in your head. I don't want the big black horse. If Chan Yu wants the horse, he will only get into trouble in the end." Looking at the confused expression on the subordinate's face, the general shook his head and looked at the blue sky outside the tent. He frowned slightly and said, "When I saw the big black horse today, I felt that it was a little familiar. I always felt that I had seen it somewhere before." General Shu Cheng threw the towel on the table and said with a reminiscing expression, "At that moment, I just remembered that I had seen the big black horse in the driving examination last spring when I represented the military ministry to inspect the academy entrance examination of the academy." The subordinate was stunned. He thought of the black lightning running in the wilderness and the violent black storm. He thought that the incredible horse actually came from the Tang Empire. You also saw how hot-tempered the big black horse was. During the academy entrance examination last spring, all the candidates who were chosen to ride the big black horse fell off, including the daughter of General Yunhui. I was patrolling above the meadow at that time and thought that no one could tame the horse. Then I saw a lad walk into the stud field. General Shu Cheng squinted slightly and recalled the scene at that time. He said slowly, "The big black horse suddenly became very obedient in front of the lad. I thought it was a little strange at that time, but when the lad's name shook Chong and City, I realized that the war horse was actually very intelligent. It actually knew the lad's power before anyone else." The subordinate asked curiously, "Who is that lad?" The general withdrew his gaze and looked at him. He said, "Ning Quebec, Ning K." The subordinate murmured. Suddenly he looked shocked and said in surprise, "Are you talking about Sir Ning, who shocked Chong, and with a piece of paper? I don't like to play with words." General Shu sighed and said, "I only know that Ning K entered the academy last year and entered the second floor this year. He has become a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I also know that when Ning K left Chong and City, the stud field in the suburbs specially sent this big black horse to him." The subordinate asked, "Then why did this big black horse appear in the palace?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew that he had asked a very stupid question. Such an unparalleled horse would naturally not be too far away from its master. If the horse was in the palace, it would naturally be in the palace. Ordinary people don't know that Ningke is ranked 13th on the second floor of the academy. But of course the military ministry knows that he used the name of Mr. 13 and stayed at the frontier fortress of north of Yin Kingdom. But even I did not expect him to personally come to the palace. General Shu frowned slightly and said to himself in a low voice, "Even the academy attaches so much importance to this peace conference. Are the desolate men in the north really so troublesome? Or is there another secret about this matter?" The subordinate thought for a moment and asked puzzledly, "General, since Ning Ke has come to the palace, why did he not show himself or come to the camp to meet you?" General Shu was silent for a moment and said with a smile, "What kind of person is the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy? He must have his reasons for not showing himself. I probably don't have that much influence. I just feel that this matter is getting more and more interesting." Dusk fell. The bonfire was lit and the sheep were hung upside down. As the aroma of wine filled the air, night fell upon the wilderness. People from all over the world gathered in the palace tribe. There were also many herdsmen from the surrounding tribes who had specially come to participate in the Gumumu gathering. Under the light of the fire and the aroma of wine, people excitedly discussed the scenes they had seen during the day. They argued about which warriors were the most powerful and whose archery skills were the best. Of course, the one that was most mentioned was the violent black horse. Countless people were guessing who its owner was. The owner of the big black horse did not hear the excited discussions of the people. He did not enjoy the wine and meat. Instead, he stole the clothes of a herdsman from the grassland. Under the cover of the night, he snuck west from the Great River camp and approached the Tang camp silently. He then turned south and sat down behind a high ground. After some time, a figure approached from the direction of the Tang camp. From his speed and body shape, it could be seen that this person was extremely cautious and vigilant. I've never understood. How can you be so sure that it's one of our people coming by drawing a picture with a wooden stick outside the camp? What if it's just a random drawing by the children on the grassland? Ningke looked at the man and said, although there was no fire behind the meadow, he could still vaguely make out the man's face and attire under the starry sky. He looked like an honest Tang cavalryman. The Tang soldier did not answer his question. His eyes were filled with suspicion, as if he did not understand why this fellow would have the leisure to say such nonsense under such circumstances. Ning Ke stretched out his hand, and the Tang soldier stretched out his hand as well. They seemed to be shaking hands, but with a light snap, the two waist tokens were gently put together, exactly the same. With the help of the starlight, the Tang soldier clearly saw the lines on Ning Ke's waist token. His expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly saluted with hands folded in front. He lowered his voice and said respectfully, "I didn't expect His Excellency to come in person. You don't know who I am. How do you know that I'm His Excellency?" Ning Ke asked with a smile. The Tang soldier's honest face revealed a simple and honest smile. He said, "It's written clearly on the waist token that His Excellency is a visiting professor of the administration. Of course, he's my Excellency." Ning Ke glanced at the man and asked in surprise, "The Imperial Center Administration is a government office for cultivation, but I don't see any fluctuation of psyche power on you. Have you entered the see-through state? If I were a powerhouse in the see-through state, I wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to follow you to the wilderness." The Tang soldier laughed and explained, "Although the Imperial Center Administration is responsible for managing cultivators, not all the staff are cultivators. There are more ordinary people like me." The reason why Ning Ke left the Blue Water Battalion and went deep into the wilderness was because of the message sent by the nation masterly Qing Shan through the Imperial Center Administration. The Imperial Center Administration would certainly find a way to leave an informant for him near the palace if they wanted to cooperate with him. He looked at the man and said, "Let's cut to the chase. Let's get down to business." The Tang soldier answered with a simple and honest smile, "If His Excellency wants to chat, we can chat. If he wants to get down to business, we can get down to business." Ning Ke was slightly startled. He smiled and thought that the man was indeed a member of the Imperial Center Administration. He probably had too much contact with those arrogant cultivators, so he didn't have the usual respect and all ordinary people had for cultivators. But his words and actions were so smooth and free. This kind of attitude was really good to use to deal with cultivators. He asked directly, "Do you know my task this time?" The Tang soldier answered honestly, "No." Ning Ke nodded and said, "That's good, because what I want to ask has nothing to do with the task." This time it was the Tang soldier's turn to be startled. His honest face showed an expression of admiration. He thought that Ning Ke was indeed a distinguished visiting professor of the Imperial Center Administration. He could make such a shameless request of using the power of the Imperial Court for his personal affairs so naturally. Ning Ke continued to ask, "How many people are there in the Tang battalion?" "About 500 people, including cavalrymen and some handymen." Ning Ke looked at the Tang battalion with fluttering flags and dense tents. He frowned and said, "It seems that there are more people in the camp." The Tang soldier explained, "One person rides 3 horses, so we need more space." "How well do you know the situation in the camp?" Ning Ke asked casually. He thought that there were hundreds of cavalrymen in the Tang battalion, and the man was just an ordinary cavalryman. How could he know everything? However, he did not expect that this Tang cavalryman was a spy placed in the northeast border military by the Imperial Center Administration. What he did every day was to observe any movement in the Tang battalion. So when he heard Ning Ke's question, he nodded without hesitation and answered, "I have a basic grasp of it." Ning Ke glanced at him and thought that he was really lucky. He asked, "Is there any special situation in the camp in the last 5 days? For example, are there any injured cavalrymen or even generals?" The Tang soldier thought for a while and shook his head. "No," Ning Ke said after a moment of silence. "Is there anything worth paying attention to in the logistics of food and medicine?" The Tang soldier was about to answer no when he suddenly thought of something. He frowned and thought carefully for a while. Then he said, "There is indeed something. The consumption of food in a tent seems to be a lot more than usual. This is not surprising, but there is also some problem with the storage of medicine in the camp." Before Ning Ke could continue to ask, he added, "The military medicine is the focus of the department, so I think there is something wrong." The medicine that is consumed for no reason are not only the medicine for hemostasis and muscle regeneration, but also some powder to calm the mind. But these medicines should not be used these days. Hearing this, Ning Kei's eyes gradually brightened. He knew that his guests seemed to be in the right direction. He looked at the brightly lit Tang battalion and asked, "Where's that tent? Can you find out who is in it?" This time, the 300 cavalrymen who escorted General Shu into the wilderness are all from Tuyang City. That tent belongs to a deputy general of the Northern Army in the east. It is heavily guarded, and ordinary cavalrymen like me can't even get close. Ning Kei frowned slightly. His eyes slowly swept across the continuous tents, as if he wanted to see the military tent. He said, "Since it is so heavily guarded, is there any way to sneak in and take a look?" The Tang soldier did not even think about it. He shook his head and said, "Unless you break in." Then he looked at Ning Kei and added very seriously, "Sir, although you are a respected foreign official and have a strong state, I am afraid there will be some problems if you break in. Even if you can break in, many people in the camp will die. How will you explain it to the imperial court afterwards?" Since there was no way to sneak in, the only way was to break in. However, although he was now a student of the academy, he still regarded himself as a member of the imperial army. He would never take the initiative to fight against his fellow soldiers, so he had to think of another way. Taking advantage of the quiet night and the sparse stars, the guy who was placed in the Northern Army by the Imperial Center Administration sneaked back to the Tang Battalion. Only Ning Kei was left behind on the meadow. The sparse yellow grass on the cold ground looked like the beard of a malnourished old man. Ning Kei lay on the sparse grass and looked at the stars in the night sky above his head. No one knew what he was thinking. A shadow suddenly covered the starry sky above his head, as if the dark night had come. Ning Kei looked at the black horse's face close to him. He looked at its thick lips that seemed to be trying to please him. He could not help but scold it with a smile. "The whole palace wants to catch you, and you still dare to come back to see me." The big black horse gently arched his shoulder. It looked extremely docile and even a little quiet, as if it was telling him that as long as he was not angry, it did not matter what others said to it. Ning Kei stood up and patted off the sand and grass on his back. He gently punched the big black horse's neck and shook his head. He lectured, "People are afraid of being famous, while pigs are afraid of being fat. People are afraid of trouble when they are famous, and pigs are easy to be killed for meat when they are fat. Why do you have to be in the limelight? Aren't you afraid that you will be snatched away when you are too famous?" The big black horse shook its head and opened its mouth. Its white teeth looked a little creepy under the starlight, as if it was sneering. It was indescribably cold, arrogant, and stupid. Ning Kei stared at its eyes and sneered. "Do you mean that even if you are snatched away, you will be treated like a treasure and will not be ordered around like an invincible horse like me?" The big black horse gently kicked its hooves and silently dug the floating soil on the wilderness. It cautiously used silence to represent its admission. Ning Kei sneered and pointed at the middle of its two strong hind legs. He said, "I don't know why the Southern Army didn't castrate you, nor did they castrate you in the field. I also don't know how you escaped the fate of being a eunuch. But you should know very well that I have no intention of castrating you. But my kindness does not mean that everyone else is. With your bad temper, do you really think that you can keep your precious eggs if you fall into the hands of Chanyu or the princess?" A cold winter wind blew over the meadow. Fear suddenly appeared in the big black horse's black eyes. It was unknown whether it was because of the cold or something else, but quickly clamped its hind legs together. However, because of its huge and powerful buttocks, it could not completely clamp them together. Ning Kei used the dark night to complete another spy contact in his life. He sorted out the situation of the Tang army and took the time to educate the big black horse. He did so many things. There were countless bonfires on the meadow. In the tents of the palace, it was as if it was daytime, but the people only did one thing, and that was to drink. The wilderness was like heaven in spring, but it was as miserable and unbearable as the underworld in midwinter. The cold wind howled and snowflakes fell at any time. It was extremely cold, so the people who live here liked to drink to warm themselves up, especially hard liquor. The people of the Central Plains and the grassland barbarians beside the bonfire had been constantly fighting over trade and war for 1,000 years. The invasion of the borders not long ago and the counterattack by the Central Plains allied forces after that had caused many casualties on both sides. How could the hatred formed by blood naturally disappear just because the higher-ups had reached an agreement? With complicated emotions, the people of the Palace tribe began to compete in drinking with the people of the Central Plains. The alcohol entered their stomachs and did not dispel their hatred. Instead, it magnified their emotions. As a result, the drinking competition became a competition, and the competition became a brawl. The soldiers of the palace and the Divine Hall, who were in charge of maintaining order, had to rush to another place after quelling a fight. The scene was extremely chaotic. There were a few tents set up at the edge of the meadow. They were very close to the Tang army, but not within the range of the Tang army. They were not affected by the chaos around the bonfires and were still exceptionally quiet, just like the people who live there. The girls from the Great River Kingdom saw many new and interesting things at the Gumumu gathering. They were quiet and composed, so they returned to the campsite in the evening. Mo Shanshan sat quietly in her tent for an entire day. White paper was spread out on the table, and she hung her wrist over it, copying something. It was as if she did not know the meaning of boredom. At this moment, the tent flap was lifted. Zhuo Jihua walked in with a young girl. She looked at Mo Shanshan and said gently, "Hill Master, a guest has come to visit." Mo Shanshan slowly stopped writing. She put the brush into a jar of clear water and turned around. The young girl was wearing the uniform of the Revelation Institute of the Divine Hall, but there was an unconcealable pride in her eyes. She had been looking around since she entered the tent, trying her best to look calm. But when she saw the young girl in white beside the table turn around, she still felt a little nervous, because this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. Mo Shanshan looked at her indifferently and said, "Who are you?" The calligraphy addict was used to speaking in such a direct tone. She did not like to talk nonsense. She was used to looking indifferent because she felt that it was very difficult to make an expression. She was used to looking disrespectful because her eyes were not very good. But just like Ning Kei, who did not know that someone had an eye disease, the female student of the Revelation Institute also felt that she had been severely underestimated and even humiliated. Her nervousness became a little irritated, but she still did not dare to be rude. Again, this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. The calligraphy addict was proud and rude. To the students of the Revelation Institute who had always been with another addict, it was easy to understand and accept. The female student of the Revelation Institute bowed respectfully and said, "Princess Chunjia invites senior sister Mo for a chat tomorrow." Mo Shanshan looked at her quietly and thought of her old friend whom she had not seen for a long time. She thought of her old friend, who was as calm as an orchid in the horse carriage above the meadow. After a moment of silence, she said, "I understand. Tonight, please do not talk to me about quality. It will be changed in the future. Tonight, please talk to me about dreams and about the honor of my father's generation. I do not believe that honor is my life, but the honor of my family seems to be taking my life." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 230. Everything in the world, be it human or emotional life, was most afraid of comparison. The girls from the Great River Kingdom chose a flat ground outside of the Tang camp to camp. Although it was a little cold and cheerless, they felt that it was quiet and not too dissatisfied. However, when they walked into the gorgeous tent where the students of the Revelation Institute were, no matter how tranquil they could not help but feel a little sad when they saw the array equipment and exquisite food. They were all young people who came under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did the disciples of the Black Ink Garden not have a good camp in the military camp of the north of Yin Kingdom? They took on a difficult task and risked their lives to come to the palace, but they still did not have a good camp. But these students of the Revelation Institute had such good treatment when they came to the palace, humming and drinking tea. Especially when they recalled the bloody battle with the horse gang under the meadow. They thought that when any others were struggling in the camp and could die at any time, The students of the Revelation Institute were coldly watching from their mounts above the meadow. The girls of the great river kingdom found it more and more difficult to accept and were unusually depressed. The students of the Revelation Institute sitting opposite them were not sad, nor were they in low spirits. There was no shame on their faces for the robbery by the horse gang. They slowly drank the tea from the precious porcelain bowls in the wilderness and did their duty as hosts to talk gently with the girls of the great river kingdom. There was a faint sense of superiority in their words. The Revelation Institute was the research academy of Haotian Taoism. It was personally taught by the West Hill Divine Palace's divine priest. For thousands of years, it had cultivated many famous bigwigs. In recent years, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, and Prince Long Qing, who were the priests of the judicial department of the Divine Hall, were well-known powerhouses. In the hearts of these young disciples, other than the academy in the south of Chong, and there was no other place in the world that could be compared to the Revelation Institute. The girls of the great river kingdom suppressed their discomfort and hatred. The students of the Revelation Institute only cared about showing their demeanor and pride. Naturally, it was impossible for them to agree with each other. But there was no conflict because of this. They just gradually stopped talking and only talked to their own sect, as if they could not see each other. In any case, they were not the main characters today. The real main characters had already entered the depths of the tent. The conversation between the two girls behind the magnificent screen was the most important matter of the day. Ning Kei, who was wearing the disciple uniform of Black Ink Garden, was sitting on a chair below. He leaned sideways and whispered something to Catgirl. From time to time, Catgirl's innocent and lovely face showed a strange and excited expression. Her little hand gently stroked a square box beside her, looking extremely cautious. Could this be a gift from the calligraphy addict, Mo Shan Shan, to the flower addict, Lu Chenjia? There were countless beauties in the world, but only 3 were famous. According to the gossip of the world, the flower addict Lu Chenjia, the princess of the Yueluan kingdom, the calligraphy addict Mo Shan Shan, the last female disciple of the master calligrapher of the great river kingdom, and the Tao addict Yi Hongyu of the judicial department of West Hill were known as the 3 addicts of the world. The beauty in everyone's eyes was different. Naturally, there was no such thing as the most beautiful person in the world. The reason why there were the 3 fanatics in the world was because these 3 girls were obsessed with a certain realm. Their cultivation realms were profound, and they had powerful backgrounds. Behind a magnificent screen in the depths of the tent, Mo Shan Shan looked expressionlessly at the beautiful girl in a light yellow slanted shirt. She said, "You were on the meadow that day." Lu Chenjia was diligently trimming the branches and leaves of an exotic 7-petal flower. When she heard this, she raised her head and smiled. She said, "This is the flower that the princess treasures. It's a pity that she didn't raise it properly. The roots have no spirit, and the flower naturally has no soul when it blooms. It's so pale that it hurts." The princess of the Yueluan kingdom had loved flowers since she was young. Before she met the perfect man in the palace, flowers were everything to her. They were even more important than her own life. Because of her love affair with Prince Long Qing and her love for flowers, everyone in the world knew of her reputation. However, when people talked about her, they could not help but talk about her appearance first. The flower addict, Lu Chenjia, was very beautiful. Her eyelashes and brows were all beautiful. She looked beautiful from every angle. She was like a meticulously cultivated flower, its petals trembling in the spring breeze. Sometimes it was budding, sometimes it was blooming, and sometimes it was shy. She was beautiful. The calligraphy addict, Mo Shan Shan, was completely different from her. Her eyebrows were thin and thick, as if they were drawn by an ink brush. Although her gaze was unfocused, it was truly clear without any distractions. Her lips were pressed into a line, and her slightly round cheeks did not seem to have the characteristics of traditional beauty. However, when these seemingly ordinary details were put together, no matter how dull her expression was, she still looked very beautiful. This was what Ning Kei thought when he first saw her. No other adjectives could describe the appearance of this girl from the great river kingdom. They might even seem redundant. He could only praise her as beautiful. This kind of beauty was not as moving and clear as Lu Chenjia's beauty. However, because it did not have any lethality, it would not be a burden to anyone's eyes. Instead, it would make the viewer feel relaxed. This kind of beauty could be looked at properly. There was no emotion on Mo Shanshan's beautiful face. She looked at Lu Qinjia and said calmly, "Since you admit that you were on the meadow at that time, then there is nothing more to say about this matter." Lu Qinjia looked at her quietly and smiled. "Sister Mo, do you want to ask me something? You admit it so calmly. Why ask again? But since you insist, I will ask." Mo Shanshan's expression was very calm. One could not tell if she was angry or happy. She said as if she was talking about someone else, "Since you were in the horse carriage on the meadow at that time, you naturally knew that the camp below was being surrounded by the horse gang. You should also know that there were disciples of the Black Ink Garden in the camp. Why did you not let the cavalrymen of Divine Hall come to help?" Lu Qinjia pursed her lips slightly and said, "After entering the wilderness, I was just an ordinary student of the Revelation Institute. How could I order the cavalrymen of Divine Hall?" Mo Shanshan looked at her indifferently, as if she was looking at the pot of flowers in front of her. She said, "If you were just an ordinary student of the Revelation Institute, you should be waiting outside at this time. How could you be qualified to sit and talk to me?" Lu Qinjia frowned slightly. She felt that the girl in white in front of her was very different from the calligraphy addict in her memories. Mo Shanshan did not care about what she was thinking and continued coldly. "The cavalrymen of Divine Hall are under the jurisdiction of the Judicial Department. You're Long Qing's fiancé. Why would they dare to disobey your orders?" She looked at Lu Qinjia and said indifferently, "If you do not want to talk about what happened on the meadow that day, then I will not. Since you want to talk about it, then don't spout nonsense. You are the flower addict, not an idiot." Lu Qinjia still did not speak. She slowly put down the small scissors in her hand and focused on Mo Shanshan opposite her. A trace of a smile appeared in her eyes. She thought to herself, what had caused the calligraphy addict to change so much? Mo Shanshan's accusations were not very sharp. Anyone could understand what had happened on the meadow that day. No matter how silent or what the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, had to bear the responsibility. Lu Qinjia did not care about these accusations. She was more concerned about Mo Shanshan's current behavior. According to her memory and the knowledge of the world, the calligraphy addict was someone who knelt in front of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone all day long. She did not care about the affairs of the world and would not speak her mind because she thought it was troublesome. She was extremely quiet and quiet. She had thought that since she invited Mo Shanshan to meet today, no matter how angry she was over the horse gang, she would not criticize her face to face. She did not expect Mo Shanshan to be so direct and tough. Lu Qinjia looked at her quietly. After a long silence, she said, "Sister Mo, you have changed. You have become much more direct and mean. I am very surprised and surprised." Mo Shanshan thought about it seriously for a moment and replied, "I did not know that being direct would sometimes have an effect of being mean." Lu Qinjia looked at her and sighed softly. She smiled bitterly and said, "I did not expect that even you have changed." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, "I have learned many things from someone recently. I'm getting used to this change." Lu Qinjia was silent for a moment and asked softly, "Did you come today to criticize me?" Mo Shanshan replied calmly and firmly, "If I did not come to criticize you, why would I come to see you?" Lu Qinjia sighed and said, "I only knew that you were under the meadow when you used the half-divine talisman." Mo Shanshan looked at her beautiful face and paused for a moment before saying, "Even if I was not under the meadow, there would be others under the blades of the horse gang." Lu Qinjia said calmly, "I know you and I admire you. So your life and death are related to me. If you die, I will be sad. The life and death of others have nothing to do with me. Naturally, I will not care." Mo Shanshan said, "I have a junior brother who died in the last attack of the horse gang." Lu Qinjia's tone was still calm. "I do not know your junior brother, so his life and death have nothing to do with me." Mo Shanshan looked at the precious flower tree beside her quietly and said, "Most people in the world have nothing to do with you and me. But this world has something to do with you and me, because sorrow and joy are always interlinked. The sorrow and joy of humans are never interlinked." Lu Chenjia raised her beautiful face and said, "Why do people like you and me have to share the sorrow and joy of the people in the dirty world? Other than flowers and a few people, there is nothing clean in the world. But you and I are clean. If you and I care about the dirty world, we will be dragged into the dust one day. What does the sorrow and joy of the world have to do with me?" Mo Shanshan's eyes drooped slightly. She looked at the mud stains on the bottom of her white dress. After a moment of silence, she raised her head and looked at her quietly. She said, "Ever since I was young, I could not win against you in an argument. I will not pretend to be a simple, sweet, and quiet orchid in front of others. So I do not want to talk to you anymore." Lu Chenjia looked at her and said emotionally, "You are being mean again. This is not good." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, "I am not being mean enough because you are not angry." Lu Chenjia frowned slightly and asked, "Why do you want to make me angry?" Mo Shanshan said, "Because I am angry because you do not know the reason why others are angry, but do not care about it. It is also because I was angry under the meadow that day." There was silence in the depths of the magnificent tent. The long silence caused an inexplicable pressure to slowly surround them. The vines on the screen seemed to be about to be broken by this pressure. After some time, Lu Chenjia looked at her calmly and said, "I want to know how you will make me angry." Mo Shanshan said, "You should have known since young that I am not good with words. I have spent my entire life in front of paper and ink, so I am used to fighting. If I completely defeat you, I wonder if you will be angry?" Lu Chenjia smiled slightly. She was like a water lily in a pond in the morning that was suddenly woken up by the chirping of a few birds. She slowly began to bloom its beautiful petals. It was so beautiful and quiet that one could not feel any hostility or desire to fight. The flower addict was the flower addict. She was infatuated with love, infatuated with her own knowledge and thoughts. She did not want to fight Mo Shanshan, so she did not prepare to do so. She only smiled quietly at Mo Shanshan. Facing such a beautiful girl who was smiling calmly at them, most people in the world, no matter how strong a cultivator's heart was, would not know what to do next. Did they really have to throw a punch? However, Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict. She had her own obsession. When she was obsessed, she was even more ruthless than the flower addict. When she decided to do something, she did not care what the situation was. Even if Lu Chenjia was a faint flower fragrance or a fragile jade carving, she did not have the spirit to pity her and attack directly. Two slender and steady fingers reached out of her wide sleeves. They were not swords, but pens. They suddenly turned and began to write their own lines on the invisible paper on the invisible table in the air. Mo Shanshan's first move was the half-divine talisman. Lu Chenjia sat quietly in the chair. Suddenly, a transparent flower appeared on her fingers. The flower could not be said to be completely transparent. On its surface, there was a faint flow of primordial chi that resembled dew droplets flowing slowly. It looked like it was carved from fog and glaze. It was extremely beautiful. A terrifying pressure enveloped the tent as the half-divine talisman was drawn. A fresh aura seeped out of the tent along with the appearance of the flower. In a tent, the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace sensed the two auras coming from afar. He woke up from his meditation and looked in that direction through the curtain. He let out a soft sigh. The half-divine talisman was so full of energy. The calligraphy addict seemed to be stronger than when they met the thief on the meadow. Even he did not dare to say that he could win. Chenjia, this flower, was probably going to lose. Lu Chenjia looked at the flower that finally melted into the air and disappeared. She looked at the girl in white and said calmly, "My cultivation state is not as good as yours, and I am not as good as the Tao addict. But I really don't care. If I lose, I lose. What I like is cutting flowers and leaves." Mo Shanshan slowly retracted her right hand into her wide sleeves. She looked at her and said, "If you're only obsessed with flowers, then you're naturally not the flower addict." Lu Chenjia seemed to have thought of something. A gentle smile appeared on her face. There was also a hint of disappointment. She said, the flower addict. I think it should be enough to be obsessed with people and flowers." Mo Shanshan stood up and looked at her. She said, "Back then, you used to hold a hoe and dig in the mud. Your hands were covered in dust, and your face was covered in sweat. I think you were better then than the so-called quiet you now. Lu Qingjiao lowered her head and continued cutting flowers. She said, but he likes the current me more, and he will protect me. Mo Shanshan looked at her silently. Her lips curled into a smile. It was the first time in her life that she had learned to smile like a winner, so she looked a little awkward. Someone told me last night that it doesn't matter how quiet you appear after you lose. But if you mention Long Qing, it means that you're starting to get angry. Then you will really lose. Lu Qingjia smiled and did not reply. The small scissors in her hands had cut off a green leaf. This chapter is better written than the previous one. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.